The ultimate mystery. Where were they killed? By whom? And with what motive? Were they killed deliberately or by chance? Questions which, as of now, have no answers.
Nearly 40 years ago, the Colonial Parkway became a symbol of terror for a generation of Virginians.
8 young people, all may have died at the hand of the same killer.
It's Virginia's oldest and largest serial killing spree. The Colonial Parkway murders.
Oh my God, there's somebody that's targeting these kids.
A predator was hunting here.
The cases involved abandoned cars at notorious lovers' lanes.
Selecting targets at random.
The cars contained victims' clothing, wallets, and keys, with no signs of struggle.
And leaving no survivors.
It's horrible.
Now we're able to say, after all of those years, the perpetrator has finally been identified. Serial killers always have a pause between their events, but as time moves on, the hunger returns. Let me do this again, because God, it was good the first time. At about 5:30 in the evening, 2 park policemen respond to a 911 call reporting an accident on the Colonial Parkway. They are flagged down by an individual. They follow him a short distance to an embankment above the York River, which flows through the park. They see a 1980 white Honda sedan, nose first in the river. They immediately work their way down to see if there's someone trapped in this car. They find 2 women in the car with a ghost-like appearance, and their throats have been deeply slashed. This is not an accident. It's a homicide.
What you see in front of you is the actual Colonial Parkway.
My name is Danny Plott. During the Colonial Parkway murder investigations, I was a special agent with the Virginia State Police. Back when the 1986 murder occurred, the Colonial Parkway was similar, but it wasn't as well maintained. It's a beautiful scenic drive. But in the late 80s, when these murders occurred, it was a pretty dark and spooky place.
Plott is an old-time cop. Danny has suffered the slings and arrows, like me, of the press and the public and the 2-bit politicians, and so on and so on. So it was a natural thing that he and I became friends. Hey, man.
Joe?
How are you?
Good. Yourself?
The same. I'm still walking around.
Me and you both.
Danny first called me because he liked my show.
I watched an episode of Homicide Hunter, and Joe's show was wonderful. You know, he would say something, and then there'd be the my. I was impressed.
And he let me know that and asked me what it was like to live in Colorado Springs, and I informed him I had moved.
And he said, I live in Suffolk, Virginia. No shit.
He asked if we could meet for lunch. I said yes.
Talking with Joe is an experience in itself. His ability with murders is amazing to me. I talked to him for hours about the Colonial Parkway murders.
which I had vaguely heard about 2,200 miles away in Colorado. They meant nothing to me at the time because they were outside my jurisdiction. But now they interested me. Danny Plott mentioned that there's been an enormous amount of press coverage. There's been a book written about him, all kinds of things. And I did not disagree with his thought process on the entire case. He was certainly on the right track. For 37 years, the killer was unknown, and the Colonial Parkway murders was his torturous career case.
Solving the case became an infatuation. It became frustrating. Sometimes we felt like we were really close in finding who did these murders, and then something would knock them out of it. Every stone that you could think of was overturned, yet here we were. Nobody was in handcuffs. The Colonial Parkway is a rural, scenic road that connects three of the biggest historical places in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Yorktown all the way to Jamestown and the Williamsburg area.
And because it's a federal park, there are no structures, no businesses, no billboards, no marks of the 21st century. There are trees and bushes and vines. So if you're on this stretch at night, you're in a Stephen King novel for 23 miles.
The Parkway also has multiple overlooks. You can call it a lover's lane. If you wanted privacy, it was the perfect place. The murders started in October of 1986. The park rangers were aghast at what they saw.
The park police summoned the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the only jurisdiction within that park, because it is federal property.
The two girls, they were identified immediately because their identifications were in the car. Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski. Their throats have been cut very badly. This was something brutal. What was very puzzling to the FBI, that blood was not in the car.
The amount of blood would have been substantial, and we've never found any bloody prints, any bloody clothing. Clearly, inside of that car is not the crime scene. Somewhere else they were killed and put into that car. Was it driven there? I don't know.
They examine the ground in this pull-off area, assuming they will find a second set of tire tracks. They find tire tracks that match the tires on the Honda, but they find no tire tracks of another vehicle.
What was really perplexing was the car was covered in diesel fuel. And there were matches around where it appeared that someone had tried to get the diesel fuel to light.
Diesel has a very high ignition point. You could light an entire book of matches and throw it into liquid diesel fuel, and all that would happen is the diesel fuel would put out the fire.
It was a failed attempt at trying to cover up their crime.
Now, what does that tell you? Whoever this is has diesel fuel. There's a lot of people that carry diesel fuel in and around in their vehicle. Truckers do, people that have a diesel car, or people with boats. Interesting.
This was not an easy case to solve. Why would somebody target two women? There's no money taken, and they're viciously, I mean viciously attacked.
Whoever is responsible for this crime is an organized offender. He has a plan. He somehow gets control of these people, And then he attacks and kills both and sends the car over the side of this embankment. You and I both know it's not difficult to push a car. You kick it out of gear, and one person can easily move a car.
Sure. But remember that it's sitting in an overlook. It's a paved overlook. Then you have a patch of grass, and there's a curb. Not a high curb, but there's a curb. So someone or some people were strong enough to push it, pop it over that. But with two passengers in it, I always felt like it was somebody with some strength.
Likely a man. Could have a helper. So now you have a solid view of what this crime scene looks like, but you're not even really sure how it happened. You need an autopsy to tell you more. So the FBI agents head to the Virginia State Medical Examiner's office. The autopsy results show that the girls had been dead for a minimum of 24 hours.
Rebecca's throat was cut, and it was cut viciously. But Kathleen was almost decapitated. There's a brutality in that. I think that says that somebody was really angry for whatever reason.
There was no evidence of sexual assault on either victim, but they found something else. The autopsy revealed that both girls suffered ligature strangulation. A ligature is any device used to put pressure on the neck to restrict the windpipe to die from asphyxia.
And in Kathleen's hair, there was a small piece of rope.
The autopsy further decides that the throat slashing was accomplished post-mortem and had nothing to do with their death. They were dead when their throats were cut. They were essentially killed twice. Who the hell are we dealing with here?
Rebecca and Kathleen were last seen Thursday night. A Honda Civic was found off the Colonial Parkway. It had been rolled into these bushes, almost into the water. The women were found with their throats slit.
The FBI agents go and notify the two victims' families of their untimely demise and say, "Tell me about your daughter."
My name's Bill Thomas. I'm the older brother of Kathy Thomas. She was fun and smart and a great friend, and her attitude was just so positive that people were drawn to her.
She graduated in the second class from the U.S. Naval Academy that had women.
She ended up first serving on this ship, a submarine tender called the USS L.Y. Spear. Now, it's during this time, though, she's also investigated for being a lesbian.
In the 1980s, the Navy remained archaic with draconian rules. Homosexuality was not acceptable in any form, particularly so in a female.
This was not going to be a place that she could live her life as a lesbian in an open fashion.
And she resigned her commission.
Even though she had left the Navy with great reluctance, Kathy was actually turning a corner into a really happy, less pressured version of her life. She was dating this wonderful woman, Rebecca Dowski.
Rebecca Dowski came from Poughkeepsie, New York. She originally attended Dickinson College and had transferred to the College of William and Mary in Virginia. She was a very bright student, and she really fit in well there.
She was in her senior year, sweet, smart, extremely athletic. She was on a championship women's softball team. So both Kathy and Becky had this I can accomplish anything attitude.
Kathy and her girlfriend were not accepted by society at large. Privacy was very important to them. What better place than the Colonial Parkway at night?
The FBI investigators focused on Kathy being in a lesbian relationship with Becky. Now, what really makes that come into play is she had been dating someone else.
There were all of these rumors that one of Rebecca's ex-lovers had gotten angry and, retaliated against the both of them.
He was Muslim. The Muslim religion does not always look at gay or lesbian relationships kindly.
Ex-boyfriend Sharif Ali realizes that Becky has left him for another woman. He is furious. He has very strong feelings about homosexual behavior, and now he's been passed over for a member of the same sex by his girlfriend. It makes him an astounding suspect. So they bring Ali Sharif in for questioning. And he admits that he has been embarrassed by her departure for another female, but he would never do her harm. He also has an alibi. He was in Washington, D.C. for the weekend, 200 miles away during the time of the killings. He may have had a motive, but he physically couldn't have done it. Over the next few weeks, the investigation slows, but the notoriety of the case really starts to move.
The two friends were last seen together in Dowski's dorm room at 7 p.m. Police sources think Dowski and Thomas then drove here to the Colonial Parkway.
I remember the ratings were extremely high. People were watching. They were talking about the romantic relationship between the two. One of the motives for a killer is someone that is opposed to this type of lifestyle.
Friends say driving along the Colonial Parkway was a Thursday night routine for Dowski and Thomas. But what happened October 9th wasn't routine. It was murder.
I don't think we understood the full gravity of what happened out there in October of '86 until September of '87. Then I think it took on a different life of its own.
Olive White Sheriff's deputy is out patrolling the Ragged Island Wildlife Management Area. There is a black pickup truck. The door is open, and no one is around.
Something was going on. The truck was running, the radio was on, and there were shoes and articles of clothing in the truck.
He calls for assistance. They go through the truck and they notice a wallet on top of the dashboard that contains a driver's license.
It was a gentleman named David Noblin. David Noblin was 19 years old. He was a resident of Newport News.
His mother has already reported him missing because he didn't return home after an evening out.
The last time he was seen was in the company of a young lady named Robin Edwards. Robin was also a Newport News resident, and she was 14 years old and was also missing.
Now everyone is alarmed. So where are the occupants of this vehicle, and what has happened to them?
Ragged Island is a creepy place to go. It's very secluded.
This parking lot was used as a lover's lane type area. It sounds a lot like the Colonial Parkway.
They had a feeling this wasn't going to end well, and they were right.
"20-year-old David Knobling and 14-year-old Robin Edwards were last seen Saturday night. His truck was found with the keys in the ignition, door open, and radio on near the James River Bridge.
The Isle of Wight Sheriff's Department launches a massive search. It's very difficult to search. There are vines and weeds and brush of all sorts. They could be almost anywhere.
Personnel from multiple agencies, a helicopter, search dogs.
This search goes on for days.
And unfortunately, on the third day, they found something.
My dad was out there at Ragged Island, chest waders, walking that whole area, looking for him.
Carl Knobling, God bless him. There were people that were telling Carl Knobling not to go down the beach. He said, you aren't going to stop me. I'm going down there.
David Knobling's father, Carl Knobling, found the bodies. I can only imagine what that's like, because they were not in very good shape.
Oh, he was brokenhearted. Brokenhearted, and we were out there with him. It was so devastating. Carl Knobling was a broken man.
Yeah, my dad didn't even have a chance to call us and give us a heads up. My mom and I, we found out on the news. I remember hearing my mom scream. My God. It was horrible.
The bodies were found further down on the riverbank itself. The James River there is brackish or brine. It's not fresh water, it's not salt water. It's a combination. And that did not do good things to human bodies.
Both bodies are bloated from decomposition, having been out for 3 or 4 days.
Robin Edwards had one gunshot wound, execution style, to the back of her head. David had 2 gunshot wounds. A gunshot wound to the left shoulder and 1 shot to the back of the head. I think Robin was shot first. And I think David knew he had 1 chance. We speculate he tried to climb a sandy clay bank, and he was within almost grabbing distance of a tree line. That's where he was shot once in the shoulder. That incapacitated him enough to where he was then shot in the back of the head and killed.
I totally disagree with that. He would definitely not run from a fight. Even if the guy had a gun, he wouldn't run from it.
So why are these bodies such a long walk from where the truck was located? Why would they go such a far distance from this vehicle?
When you leave that parking lot and you want to go down here, you have to walk down this boardwalk because all this is marshland, like swamp.
Mm-hmm.
So to get down to here, good little walk. But you don't walk down a wooden, older boardwalk barefoot.
Not willingly.
No, not willingly. So how did they end up down there?
2 possibilities, in my opinion. They're running from somebody, barefoot because they don't have time to put their shoes on, or they're marched down there by the perpetrator. So who would want to murder these 2 people in cold blood? Investigators go to the families to see if they can determine suspects.
This is the way I seen my brother, like this one. Just him laid back, cutting up, having fun, smiling, you know? I definitely looked up to David. He tried toughening me up, and he did it with kicking my butt a lot. He was a great brother. I met Robin through my cousin Jason. We went to the same school together. She was always a real cool person.
We had sort of prepared ourselves for them to find her either hurt, possibly drowned. We were not prepared to find her murdered.
Robin was the youngest of the Colonial Parkway murder victims. She was 14. She had been through a lot in life. She was the kind of girl that often ran away. She got into trouble.
She could be very, very sweet, and she could be the most aggravating and irritating child in the world. She was very independent.
But Robin was also at a turning point in her life. She was finally starting to apply herself to her classes. She was starting to turn things around.
The big questions unanswered are, why was David with Robin at the wildlife preserve? And what happened after they got there?
That day, I followed him out, bummed a cigarette from him, and we talked in the driveway for 15, 20 minutes, I guess, and then he left. I carried that through my life, that I was able to say bye to him. I don't know why. It just seems so small now, but at the time it was big.
So they learned that David and Robin were hanging out at an arcade in the area with their friends, and David agreed to take Robin home. They are not a couple, according to the family, but what does the killer see? A man and a woman. And what would he assume from that? They are lovers in Lover's Lane, as were the first two women. Much of this is very familiar.
The murders are the ultimate mystery. Where were they killed? By whom? And with what motive? Were they killed deliberately or by chance? Questions which, as of now, have no answers.
That drove those of us that worked on the task force that we need to find this person because they're just heartless and brutal. When David and Robin were autopsied, the investigation revealed that Robin had been sodomized and there was still semen in her cavity. The medical examiner said this sample is very degraded because you had bodies laying in the water for 3 days.
This is 1987. DNA is in its infancy.
DNA databases were either non-existent or just starting, but the sample was preserved.
So now what? There's a possibility the motive is sexual assault of the female victim, but it's only a possibility. But why kill them? There's no answer for that. Despite the differences, the similarities are just too great. Proximity, darkness, area, type. People don't get killed in parked cars very often. The odds are great. This is the same person or persons responsible for both. You've got a hunter, somebody who's busy. A year later, the appetite returns.
They haven't been arrested. They probably haven't even been talked to.
No, they haven't been found. So now they become convinced that maybe they're pretty clever. Let me do this again, because God, it was good the first time.
But I'm not going to do it where I did it before.
No, but still in the general vicinity. They kill where it's convenient.
Places they know.
And I would be very worried that the bodies were going to start to pile up here. 4 dead, and there's going to be more dead if that theory is correct. He's going to do it again. He will continue unless he is stopped. These murders came to be known as the Colonial Parkway murders.
Police sources claim that 2 cases are so alike, the same persons may be responsible.
this story really picked up from the very beginning. It was very much an East Coast highlighted story because double murders were incredibly rare.
These young couples are violently dead in an otherwise picturesque place. How could this be?
Everyone was talking about whether this is the work of a serial killer.
Once the police realized, oh my God, we're dealing with connected crimes or potentially connected crimes, police presence on the Parkway increased dramatically.
And that was the first time we heard about the possibility of a serial killer or a pattern emerging. And I felt the investigation begin to shift.
It turned this area upside down. I mean, people were scared to go up and down the parkways, and my mom was scared to death when I went out, scared to death.
Everyone is very busy now looking for people who seem to be out of the area, seem to be doing something that doesn't look right.
After the murders, people realized they may be going to the Colonial Parkway at their own risk, but it didn't stop them. Sure, the last thing they thought of is that they would get approached or grabbed on the Colonial Parkway. It scared a lot of people, but unfortunately it didn't scare them all.
The families held a vigil, a memorial to remind us all the killer is still out there.
The pressure exerted by the press and by the public results in the formation of a Colonial Parkway Murders Task Force, where agencies come together. More heads are better than one. Danny Plott was a trained and experienced homicide agent. Plott became in command.
We were given a conference room and told to have at it.
The common theory at the time is that the perpetrator is driving around the Colonial Parkway area looking for victims parked in a car alone in the dark in a lover's lane kind of area.
One thing we tried, we took a male agent and a female agent, and we put them in cars, different nights, different times, and waited to be approached. I worked some surveillance. I had a beard. I had actual hair. I was lucky enough to know who I was with, but you run out of things to talk about after a couple hours. Surveillance is cool in the movies. It is far from it in real life. We were approached. But all we did was, I think, scare the living daylights out of somebody that just was hoping they could see naked flesh. Somebody that just kind of hung around and tried to look in. Nobody wished any more for an arrest than those of us that were on that task force.
Your killer is a shadow in the night. You're pedaling a bike that is stationary, and no matter how hard you pedal, it goes nowhere.
The task force established tip lines.
And you get hit with tons of tips that are just crazy.
Many people will call in and report the little green men from Mars are responsible for this. But every once in a while, somebody says something that sounds reasonable, and you pay attention to that.
There was a man named Sammy Ryder that said he saw Robin and David. Maybe here's a lead we can work with.
Sam Reeder was at Ragged Island and remembers seeing David's truck.
I just took one quick look around. I flashed my headlights back in the brush, but I couldn't see anything.
He paints himself as an eyewitness. They bring Sammy Reeder in, they talk to him. So Mr. Reeder says that he stops at Ragged Island on his way home from a date. He notices this truck
He said that he saw Robin and David get out of the car.
He admires the truck, said it's very nice, very clean.
The truck was running, the radio was on.
So he says all these things, none of which is earth-shattering because it's what the press reported.
Another statement was, I heard 2 shots. They had to be coming from the marshland way in the back. I decided it was time to leave and I left. There are several things wrong with Ryder's statement.
There were actually 3 shots fired that night. 2 were fired at David Knobling and 1 at Robin.
Sammy didn't mention anything about them being barefoot, but their shoes are in the car.
The sand down there is not smooth sand. It is made up with a lot of jagged shells, etc.
It is extremely unlikely, not wearing shoes or socks, that they would walk this far in rough terrain on their own accord.
Somebody marched them down to the place where they died. They did not get out of the car and go strolling down there.
He is inserting himself in a serial killer investigation. Now, why would he do that?
When Mr. Ryder was pressed, he finally admitted, well, I took money out of David Knobling's wallet. I don't know if he figured if he came up with this tip and they found his print somewhere on the truck, he would be able to say, well, I was just looking in. Well, I think he did it out of trying to cover his ass.
What he saw was a wallet, and he took advantage of it. Oh, Sammy, why are you wasting our time with this? He didn't kill 2 people. He didn't know who did.
Law enforcement were very frustrated with the investigation. They weren't solving the case. People were fearful.
I've noticed that a lot of girls aren't walking on campus by themselves, especially late at night.
Obviously, we have to consider that there's a dangerous person or persons still in the community.
We needed this task force to try to, if not tie these murders together, find common denominators or separate them.
Plott is experienced and he's smart. He sees the rivers. And he said, hey, look at this map. What is around all of these crime scenes? Water. How do you move in water? You move in water in a boat.
The thing I remember about the autopsies of Kathleen and Rebecca was this rope that was found. It was a piece of nautical rope, which to me, nautical rope is either used on a boat or used to tie up a boat.
Now that is an interesting fact. What if our man is a boater? Maybe we've been thinking about this wrong the entire time. How did he approach these people?
If he used the boat in some way, I think he had to anchor the boat on the river and use a smaller boat to come to the bank.
If you got a trolling motor, it makes little or no sound. So you can maneuver around in this water and nobody even knows you're there. You have no obligation legally to put lights on your boat. You're not at sea. You're in inland waterways. No one's going to question you. You're a waterman.
Right.
The word waterman is very specific to this area. It's people who are involved in the oyster business and the fishing business in the York River, the James River, and the Rappahannock River. They have their own dialect. They have their own language generationally, all the way back to the colonial period.
This could be a waterman. That's someone we need to concentrate on.
So what else do we know? The toys used in these crimes are the toys that watermen use as tools. Most of these boats have diesel motors.
Diesel was used in Rebecca and Kathleen's murder. Whoever killed them brought diesel fuel with them to the scene.
We have an extremely sharp instrument that cuts their throats. Fishermen take care of their knives.
Part of their living.
Part of their living, sharp as a razor. You can fillet a fish in a heartbeat. This all became known as the Waterman theory. Danny Plott and other cops he brought with him survey the fishermen in the area. These are an unusual lot. They operate in private, they're loners.
They are tough as oak. They did not take kindly to being, even interviewed.
They picked a lifestyle that they don't want to interact with people. And for straight-laced FBI guys to walk into a Waterman bar and say, hey, we want to ask some questions, they're not going to get any progress from that.
At this point, it's an all-hands-on-deck sort of investigation. But as it turns out, shortly they will discover even that is not enough. The park police have informed Danny Plott they have found yet another abandoned vehicle on the Colonial Parkway. The keys are in the ignition, the car is running, and nobody's around, and Plott's heart is in his throat.
You're going, oh shit, here we go again.
The Colonial Parkway serial killer is back in business. Danny Plott is very concerned. Where are the people from this car?
This has a lot of similarities to the other murders.
Lovers lanes, near water, only 1 mile from the Thomas Dowski crime scene. 1 mile? Are you kidding me?
The park rangers informed Plott that they ran a registration check on the vehicle and determined it's owned by Keith Call. They contact Call's parents. They report him missing that morning. The parents say he was with a female named Cassandra Haley. And Cassandra Haley's parents also report her missing. Where are they?
Some of their clothes and the car keys found inside the car.
A Navy security team looks through the woods. Park rangers use a bloodhound and a boat for air scent over the water. Other dogs comb the beachfront area.
A dog traced the couple's scent to the water's edge.
And then the scent ends.
The dogs are telling them those bodies are in this water. But they're not there now because water moves and it moves bodies with it.
I searched the Parkway in a company of United States Marines who walked an arm's length away from each other across a whole area near where that car was found.
The search dogs take the scent and they march directly to the York River.
And that night, the nor'easter had been passing through.
Right. High waves.
High current.
60, 70 mile an hour winds and driving rain. So they are disposed of, killed by some method or means. They go in the York River, the nor'easter comes and sweeps them where? Out to sea. Maybe all the way out.
Wouldn't take much.
And these two poor, unfortunate young people are never found.
Not a trace of them. The families couldn't even have a funeral.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
I didn't want to think the worst to start with. All of a sudden, there's all these police calling the house, and then as the day went on, you just kind of came into that reality that something had happened. Keith just vanished into thin air.
Keith was really just a good-hearted kid. And you just don't ever think that when somebody walks out of the door, it's going to be the last time you see him.
He was into computers, you know. We had some of the first. He was in there banging away on his Commodore 64 and learning everything about that. And he was just like that 80s guy.
In 1988, when this happened, he was in his first semester of college. And then with Cassandra, they were friends. And she was really a pretty girl.
Cassandra was the it girl. I mean, she was a cheerleader. She's got a magnetism about her. She was very bright. She was really looking forward to completing her education and going on with a career.
They went out that night to a movie, and then they decided to stop by some kind of college party going on there.
Friends confirm Keith and Sandra partied at the University Square Apartments April 10th. They left around 2 a.m., then disappeared.
And then Cassandra had to be home at a certain time. They said their goodbyes, and that's the last time anybody saw them.
The Parkway was not a place that you went like that and just left your car there. Keith was more responsible than that. The other murders had already happened. Keith wouldn't have went there.
It always haunted me, and it haunts me to this day, that we did not find Keith and Cassandra's remains. We have to find the murdering son of a bitch that did this.
They finally decide, all right, let's go back and start over.
About 6 months into the FBI task force of the Colonial Parkway murders, we had come to a couple conclusions. Looking at all the scenes, the vehicles, the wallets out, we decided who we were looking for was a person of authority.
So imagine now it's nighttime here. You're with somebody you care about. You're not really thinking about anything. And then suddenly, there's a knock on your window, and a man with a flashlight says, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here."
What if this killer poses as a policeman? In the process of somebody getting out their ID, he pulls a gun, so he now has control. Could that be? Of course it could.
During this era, you could buy an old cop car complete with a side light, etc., for $300 at a police auction and duplicate being a cop.
We decided to hold a press conference with the FBI's blessing, and it exploded.
It reached the point where, even in the newspaper articles, they were warning people to verify that if they were being pulled over, that it was really a policeman.
The media took it and ran with it because it made a good story.
Nothing about this seems to work, and then you begin to convince yourself that nothing will ever work. Law enforcement are running out of room at the morgue. This is one serious guy. He's not gonna stop. As cases go on for years, they become more difficult. Colonial Parkway murders have slowed down. Nothing much has been happening. No news, no new events. An anonymous tipster calls the task force and says an individual has been harassing couples in the Lover's Lane pull-offs on the Colonial Parkway.
They called him a peeping Tom.
Really? Now that is interesting. Who might you be, Mr. Peeping Tom? And what are you doing on the Parkway?
Through a FBI or state police tip line, we get a tip that a man in a blue truck is stopping and looking in parked cars on the Parkway. They get a tag. The tag reads EMRAW, eat 'em raw. What do you eat raw? Oysters. That truck comes back to a waterman named Alan Wilmer. So now the FBI has somebody that they can look at.
This could be him. This could be the Colonial Parkway killer, and they need to act fast.
The FBI and the Virginia State Police now have what appears to be a viable suspect. The FBI surveils him, goes to his residence, where they find him cleaning his truck.
They noticed Wilmer was out spray painting the back of his vehicle, and that he was bleaching the interior of the vehicle.
Now, why would he do that? Is he concealing evidence?
Maybe this is our guy. They immediately go to get a search warrant.
The FBI return to Wilmer's place. They present him with the warrant. He is cooperative. He steps aside, and they search the premise.
They do the search warrant of his truck. Doesn't reveal a whole lot, but the search of his house reveals several things.
They find an enormous supply of pornography. They find guns. They find pairs of handcuffs and other bondage devices.
I am not saying that makes you someone that kills people, but you put everything together. This is not your average guy.
They continue to talk to him. He denies any knowledge of any of this, denies everything. They have no evidence that could result in an arrest. They decide that they will have an FBI polygraphist take a shot at this guy.
Mr. Wilmer was interviewed, and he did admit to being on the Parkway and approaching a vehicle or two.
Which was very useful information, but his story changed a little bit.
He said, yeah, I was on a Colonial Parkway, but I wasn't in that particular pull-off. I was in another one. I walk around out there, and I look for places to fish. Nothing wrong with that, and there isn't anything wrong with that. So he takes the polygraph, and the polygraphist says he didn't do this. He's innocent. And the FBI looks at that polygraphist and says, well, you better be right.
The FBI decided that him passing a polygraph and the lack of direct physical evidence was enough to say he's not the one.
He looks good, nothing happens. He moves on, and so does the task force.
FBI and state police, if one of us got a lead, you know, we'd let the other one know. But the leads, they just weren't there. And, you know, a family member, they weren't shy, and I don't blame them. And they sometimes weren't shy in the media. You know, my son and daughter, sister, brother, brutally murdered. What are you doing?
You didn't hear nothing about it. The FBI didn't talk to anybody. And then Joyce would consistently pick up the phone and call them up and ask them about the case and all that.
It seemed like they weren't giving us a lot of information. It just kind of went dead, and I didn't handle it very good at all. I mean, even to this day, that is the worst thing that's ever happened. It's just like somebody walks out the door and they're fine, and they just don't come back, and you don't have answers. You don't have a body.
The anxiety was terrible at that time. I mean, it's just not knowing what happened to him, just nothing but anxiety. It just doesn't go away, you know?
You have to become your own advocate because no one else will do it for you. We're the ones now kind of trying to advance this case. I'm looking for answers. Who killed my younger sister and her girlfriend? All of these other families, mine included, deserve answers.
All our answer was, we're doing everything we can. It had been years, nothing.
Labor Day weekend 1989, and a Virginia state trooper is investigating an abandoned vehicle in a rest area that's left running with the keys in the ignition.
And when he ran the tag, of course, it ding, 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 ding. This is a car of a missing person.
The car comes back to 21-year-old Daniel Lauer, reported missing with 18-year-old Anna Maria Phelps. The Colonial Parkway killer is back. And maybe this time he's left the waterfront. The investigators are instantly suspicious that this is the Colonial Parkway killer. But what's different?
Along I-64, their car was found at a westbound rest stop.
They call it the New Kent Rest Area.
This rest area is many miles from the Colonial Parkway. This is inland, not the waterfront where he has been for years.
So I went up there and I find the car, a gold Chevy Nova with black primer.
He sees this car, clothes in the back seat, keys in the ignition, car running. It is no question, it is deja vu. We're dealing with the same guy.
Anna Maria Phelps was a 18-year-old young lady from Amelia County, Virginia, who had recently dropped out of school.
School wasn't for her. She wanted to work. She wanted to get ahead in life. She wanted to be on her own. And she had a boyfriend named Clinton Lauer.
The other victim, Daniel Lauer, was her boyfriend's brother.
Daniel, he was a horse lover. He liked riding. He was 6 foot tall. He was a dominating force. And anybody that handles horses, he wasn't a weakling either. Daniel was doing very well. His father had a painting business and he worked there. His father had gotten him a Chevy Nova. In many respects, he was on the right path for independence himself. And Daniel had decided he wanted to kind of get out on his own. And the plan was for Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer to drive to Virginia Beach. And the best way to get there was on I-64.
We learned from the families that they never arrived in Virginia Beach.
If they are in fact missing and they're not in this car, then where are they? Could the Colonial Parkway killer have abducted and killed them just like the others?
Where are these people? What has happened to them?
And the search begins.
There was a search by special agents of the Virginia State Police and troopers of the Virginia State Police in the general area. No Anna Maria and Daniel. Again, it's very frustrating. And I can only imagine what it's like for the families.
We really love both of them very much. And if there's anything at all that you can do to help, we'd appreciate it.
6 weeks later, on October 21st, 1989, 2 turkey hunters find something shocking.
I get a call, hey, we need you to go near the New Kent Rest Area. I'm there. There was a logging road. That was the best way to describe it. And there was a deputy station there. And I stopped and he said, go up here. You didn't walk very far up the fork of the road. And then you went into the woods. I could see they already had a tent set up.
They find skeletonized remains of humans. 2 skulls and bones.
These are 2 young people that, unfortunately, best way to describe it nicely is they melted into the ground.
They were so badly decomposed at the time that it was very difficult to determine exactly what happened.
That's me with a shovel in my hand. I would have been 33, maybe. I believe it had rained slightly, as you can tell. One man's wearing a raincoat. The bottom photo is Anna Maria's locket. That was found at the fork of the road. We speculate that that maybe was where she was killed and that locket came off. When the general area was searched, there was, very little to find. No bullets, no knife, no anything.
An autopsy confirmed the body of Anna Marie Phelps. Another body is believed to be Dan Lauer.
The skeletal remains were taken to the Smithsonian Institute with the forensic anthropologist, Dr. Doug Owsley.
Autopsies of skeletons yield little other than sex and age, and any wounds to the bone structure.
When he examined the skeletal remains, Dr. Owsley found what he deemed a knife wound on Anna Maria's left hand. And he speculated that if someone is getting ready to cut your throat, you hold your hands up, and it was a diagonal knife wound on her third finger. That's the only trauma that he could save.
Is this the Colonial Parkway killer? Well, of course it is. There's a change here and there in the MO, but so what? Either way, they work.
The couple's disappearance is strikingly similar to others, including Robin Edwards and David Knobling.
The only difference is that they were found in the woods instead of in the river.
The victims are in cars. There's 2 of them. They're probably very vulnerable.
He strangles, cuts the throat of Rebecca and Kathleen. He shoots David and Robin. He disposes of the bodies, however it was done, of Keith and Cassandra, and then lays the other 2 side by side.
There are a couple things that are different, but there are some things that are not.
2 on the Parkway, 2 within easy driving distance of the Parkway.
His method up to now has been the sea and the water. Now his method is a concealment in the deep woods. What does that mean? Did he become fearful of the increased patrol activity on the Parkway? Probably. He doesn't want to stop killing. He just wants to stop the police from getting close to him. And the reality is he may never be found. This individual has eluded law enforcement for years. If he's shifting his MO and he's committing other murders, we may not even recognize them as his. He's a killer. That's what he does. The question always becomes, has he done other crimes? Of course he has.
That's what's kind of scary.
There's going to be other victims. How many did he kill? We have no clue. There have been 8 dead. There's a possibility there are others dead that we don't even know about. And the case continues to be cold, despite their focus on it for years. They've gotten nowhere fast.
After the task force, I worked several years in the fugitive unit as a special agent, which took me away from it, and it was given to somebody else. But I worked in and around the same office, and I did not have the least bit problem saying, hey, anything new with Ragged Island? Anything new with the Parkway murders? No, go away.
Despite all the effort, despite all the leads and all of the investigative work, the years begin to tick by, and no justice has been found for the families.
My mom and my dad kept in touch with the police over the years, and I took it with a grain of salt. I had zero expectation about finding out who killed my brother after the 10th year, the 20th year, the 30th year.
And it's been a horrendous waiting game the whole time. Just a cold waiting game. It's all it's been.
It's not like it was forgotten, but it's just like, what do you do? None of us were brought up in law enforcement. None of us had any background on what to do if your brother is abducted or murdered.
You've got 8 victims, 16 moms and dads. We've lost 9 of them so far. Both of my parents passed away. It's been 37 years. I can't really say it gets easier to talk about.
All of these victims have been dead much longer than they were alive.
Many of the investigators involved in this are retired, but this is not a case anybody ever forgets. It's been very hard on Danny.
I retired from the state police in 2013. But those murders have never been far from my mind, and I still remember the frustration of why can't we find this person?
It's the worst feeling in the world. You feel like a failure. You feel like you haven't done your job. You know better. You did everything humanly possible. It just wasn't enough. And you beat yourself up for that. December 2017, law enforcement responds to a 911 complaint about a foul odor emanating from a private residence. They find a badly decomposed body that basically is a bed full of soup.
The decay was horrible. They don't know if they're dealing with a natural death, a suicide, or a murder.
The autopsy reveals advanced arterial sclerosis and blocked arteries. In other words, his heart got blocked up and it stopped, and so did he. They take samples of these remains for the purpose of obtaining DNA and the possibility of using it to identify the individual. Little did anyone know this was someone who was directly under their noses the entire time.
January of 2024 was when we got the first substantial break in the Colonial Parkway murders.
A detective is going through the daily crime sheets, notices this death case, looks at the name, and recognizes it. It was from years ago.
I was called, and the person said, "The name Alan Wilmer mean anything to you?" And I said, "Yeah, Parkway murder suspect."
This was the guy that was identified by an anonymous person as a peeping Tom on the Colonial Parkway. The FBI looked at him and they let him go because they couldn't prove anything.
Suddenly, there's a connection back to the Colonial Parkway, which means a connection potentially to all the Colonial Parkway murders, which means you start looking for where do we have DNA that we might be able to compare. Robin Edwards had been sodomized, and to the credit of the Virginia State Police, they managed to maintain some of the samples of that DNA for ages.
Alan is deceased, but now we have a DNA sample from him, and they compare that sample taken from the victim to the sample taken of Alan Wilmer Sr., and it's a 100% match. Well, my. After decades of work and effort and theorizing, they finally have a name. All these years later, Alan Wilmer Sr. is the Colonial Parkway killer.
Best way to put what I was ecstatic. You know, I was ecstatic. I was also humbled and a little bit irritated at myself that I knew that Alan Wilmer was a great suspect.
But who is this guy? Who is Alan Wilmer Sr.?
What was Alan Wilmer besides a murdering piece of shit? He was a waterman.
He was a commercial fisherman specifically who farmed clams and oysters. He spent the majority of his time on his boat, a vessel he named Denny Wade.
From a geographic perspective, the anchor point is the York River, and that's where he worked every day. It makes complete sense that it was a waterman all along.
Also, Wilmer was an avid hunter. He belonged to a hunt club not far from the area where the fourth murder victims were discovered skeletonized.
When you look at Phelps Lauer, their bodies were found on a private hunting reserve. Is there a connection? We don't know. But where there's smoke, there's often fire.
Everything about Alan Wilmer's life fits the entire style of the Colonial Parkway killer. He moves by boat. He's around at night, where you can see the lovers' lanes from the water. Everything about him seems to come together once he's identified and firmly linked scientifically to one victim.
The FBI had called us, and they let us know that they had a DNA match. I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked.
I got a call from our case agent, and they were bringing up Alan Wade Wilmer. It was just like, oh my God, oh my God.
Our family went through so much freaking heartache and pain wondering what the happened to my brother, you know, and come to find out they had the right guy the whole freaking time.
When you talk about anger, there has been like 35 years worth of anger. It's maddening. There he was in the very beginning.
I'm still angry about it to this day. I thought it was outrageous. They told my family they were looking at Waterman. This is that guy. Is he responsible for Kathy and Becky's murder as well?
It always makes me wonder, could law enforcement have prevented the things that followed? The deaths, the loss of life.
The FBI decided that him passing a polygraph was enough to say he's not the one. The decision was made, and that wasn't made by me. I can't say we let him go, but we didn't do enough. I would have done anything, threatened him, anything else to try to get him to admit to it, but I don't think he was the kind of person that would.
He passed a polygraph, but so what? He also happens to be a sociopath, so he doesn't react. Thus, a polygraph is useless. He's not capable of emotion.
Someone like Wilmer? I killed 2 people today. Big deal.
That's what makes him so dangerous. Why is there only a DNA hit on one case when there are 4 double murders that everyone says are connected? One possible answer is no evidence contained any perpetrator DNA.
Robin and David's murder, that is the only one of the 4 that there was actual known DNA evidence.
So, what is known about the 4 Colonial Parkway double homicides?
At the very beginning, the FBI behavioral profilers said Waterman.
The first 3, 86, 87, 88, all of them took place right against the water, either the York River or the James River.
You're dealing with a creature from the Black Lagoon. It's possible that in the first murder, he spots Kathy and Rebecca in Lover's Lane, together in a car, approaches them, he strangles them, and he slashes their throats. He put them in Kathy's Honda, soaked it in diesel fuel, tried to burn it. Then he shoved it over the embankment, assuming it would sink in the river and disappear. His attempt at disposal is a disaster. In the second killing, David Knobling and Robin Edwards, he sodomizes Robin Edwards, and he shoots her in the back of the head. David is shot in the shoulder and the back of the head. They're thrown in the river, assuming they'll float away, but they wind up trapped under the embankment. Another failure. However, DNA this time remains behind, which ultimately becomes his undoing.
By Keith and Cassandra's murder, he had perfected his craft.
If this was his third murder, he abducted and killed them, threw them in the water.
He went out and he fished, clammed, oystered from that boat. How hard would it have been to take them out on that boat and dispose of their bodies? It would have been very easy.
The fourth murder, Daniel Lauer and Anna Maria Phelps. They are discovered miles away from the Parkway.
My best speculation is they stopped at the eastbound rest area of New Kent. That's where Wilmer took control of them. And then they were carried to these two positions where they were found.
It seems he learns from his mistakes. He gets better at disposing of remains. But what is his deal about couples? Does he hate them? What motive could there be? Maybe just a willingness to kill. And perhaps that's the only motive he needs.
Now, we learned that Wilmer's sphere was even larger. We now have some evidence that we can weigh against these other cases.
Here we have Alan Wilmer. We have him tied to the murder of Robin and David. Luckily, we got DNA from that.
But that wasn't the only crime his DNA hit on.
He was tied to another murder of a lady in Hampton.
There was a 29-year-old woman named Teresa Howell who left the nightclub and disappeared. She was found naked, strangled, and raped. And the perpetrator DNA was none other than Ellen Wilmer Sr.
We now know that he killed people that were alone. So the net gets cast pretty wide to look at cases that this guy may have been involved with.
Well, it's always difficult to say what will happen now. Will the DNA science advance further? Will they be able to determine something from some of these cases to link him directly to the crime? It's entirely possible. Prosecution will never occur. You can't prosecute a dead guy.
But I hope he's facing some kind of judgment.
Well, you would hope so. You would hope so. Perhaps he'd move to a higher court.
If we had had hindsight and law enforcement in general, FBI, state police, Isle of Wight County Sheriff's Office, this would have been handled different. But the only answers we can really for sure give is to Miss Howell's family, the Noblin family, and the Edwards family. The FBI and the Virginia State Police, they have not stopped. And I hope they can tie him to any and all of them. All of these families deserve answers.
This completely destroyed my mother. In one night, she lost her only daughter, her youngest child, and her best friend. This is a solvable case. All it takes is time, attention, and resources.
It's not something that we ever wanted to be burying a younger brother. Keith was just starting out his life. He had aspirations. He was a good kid.
I hated that he didn't have the opportunity to grow up, and to have a family. I mean, that got robbed, Keith. He robbed him of a whole entire life.
That was my big brother, man, you know? Doesn't get any tighter than that. I mean, it's not fair. I've missed so much with him. So much. I know my life would have been so much different if he was still in it. God, I wish he was still here.
Some people never have to pay the bill for what they've done in their life. They just crook, like everybody does.
I'll be quite frank with you. I hope there is a special, special place in hell for this man. And every day, what he did to those kids is done to him for eternity. Then, maybe, it'll be
September 13th, 2006. At 12:42 in the afternoon, downtown Montreal looked exactly the way it was supposed to. The city was alive. Cars rolled through intersections beneath a bright early autumn sky. Office workers carried paper cups of coffee back to glass towers. Students drifted between classes, laughing about assignments they hadn't started and exams they weren't worried about yet. The air held that strange balance unique to September in Canada, summer refusing to leave, autumn waiting just around the corner. For thousands of young people, it was an ordinary Wednesday. For some of them, it would be the last ordinary moment of their lives. Inside Dawson College, one of Montreal's largest English-language colleges, the lunch hour was beginning. The campus pulsed with the familiar rhythm of student life. Conversations echoed through hallways. Backpacks scraped against lockers. Phones vibrated with messages about weekend plans. Friends gathered around tables in the atrium, discussing classes, relationships, music, and futures that seemed endless. No one knew that death was already walking toward the building. No one knew that somewhere nearby, a 25-year-old man had spent months feeding a darkness that had finally reached its destination. No one knew that within minutes, the atrium would become a battlefield. The first thing many witnesses would remember later was not the gunfire. It was confusion. A sharp sound. Then another. And another. Sounds that did not belong in a college. Sounds the human brain refuses to recognize at first. A dropped object. Construction work. A car backfiring somewhere outside. Anything but what it really was. Then came the screams. The kind of screams that transform a normal day into a nightmare. The kind of screams that tell everyone nearby that something impossible is happening. Students turned their heads toward the entrance. Some stood. Others froze. For a fraction of a second, hundreds of people occupied the same terrible moment between uncertainty and realization. Then reality arrived. A man carrying firearms had opened fire. Panic erupted instantly. Chairs crashed onto floors. Backpacks were abandoned. People who had been laughing moments earlier were now running for their lives. The atrium became a storm of movement. Some students sprinted toward exits. Others threw themselves behind concrete pillars. Some dropped to the ground, hoping they would not be seen. Many would later struggle to remember exactly where they ran or how they got there. Trauma has a way of tearing holes in memory. What remains are fragments. The sound of footsteps. The sight of terrified faces. The feeling of lungs burning from sprinting. The desperate thought repeating itself again and again. Please don't let it be me. Please don't let me die here. Outside, sirens began racing through Montreal. Police vehicles cut through traffic. Emergency dispatchers struggled to process a flood of frantic calls. Reports came in rapidly and often contradictorily. A shooting. Multiple victims. An armed suspect. Students trapped inside. No one yet understood the full scale of what was unfolding. No one knew how many were injured. No one knew how many might die before the day was over. Inside the college, time began behaving strangely. For those running, seconds felt like hours. For those hiding, every sound became unbearable. Every footstep carried the possibility of discovery. Every silence carried the possibility that something worse was coming. Students crouched beneath desks. They squeezed into classrooms. They locked doors. Some called their parents. Some called their friends. Some simply held their breath. Many would never forget the vibration of cell phones in trembling hands. Calls made because they genuinely believed they might never get another chance. Across Montreal, mothers and fathers were sitting at work when their phones rang. Some received calls from children crying uncontrollably. Others received brief messages. "I love you. Something is happening. I'm scared. Police are here." Some parents would spend the next hours trapped in a state of helpless terror, staring at television screens and waiting for information that never seemed to arrive fast enough. And while chaos spread through the city, another story was reaching its conclusion. The story of the gunman. Long before that Wednesday afternoon, there had been warning signs. Not the kind that make sense in the moment. The kind that become visible only afterward. Fragments. Pieces. Digital footprints scattered across the internet. Photographs. Dark writings. Expressions of hopelessness. An obsession with violence. A fascination with death. Like many tragedies, Dawson College would force people to ask a question that follows nearly every mass shooting. Could this have been prevented? The question sounds simple. It never is. Because hindsight is merciless. After a tragedy, every warning appears brighter. Every red flag seems obvious. Every missed opportunity feels impossible to understand. But before disaster strikes, the picture is rarely clear. Human beings are complicated. Pain is complicated. And the line separating private suffering from public violence is often invisible until it is crossed. On that September afternoon, nobody inside Dawson College was thinking about those questions. They were focused on survival. They were focused on reaching another minute. Another hallway. Another locked room. Another chance. The gunfire continued. The sounds echoed through concrete corridors and open spaces. Each shot carried fear farther across the campus. Each shot created another circle of trauma that would continue expanding for years. Some students would later describe a surreal feeling, as though they had stepped outside reality itself. The world they understood no longer existed. Rules had disappeared. Safety had disappeared. The future had disappeared. All that remained was the present moment. Raw. Violent. Uncertain. The human mind searches desperately for order during chaos. It looks for explanations. It looks for logic. It looks for meaning. But mass violence offers none. There is no warning announcement before it begins. No preparation. No gradual transition. One moment life exists exactly as expected. The next moment everything changes. At Dawson College, hundreds of young people were learning that lesson simultaneously. Many would carry it forever. Years later, survivors would still remember tiny details with startling clarity. The color of a hallway wall. The smell of dust. The sound of someone crying nearby. A stranger grabbing their hand while running. The sensation of cold concrete beneath their body. Trauma is selective. It erases years. Then preserves seconds. Those seconds become permanent. A frozen collection of images that remain untouched by time. For Montreal, the attack reopened wounds that never fully healed. The city already carried memories of previous acts of mass violence. Names. Dates. Places. Events etched into collective memory. Now another chapter was being written. Another scar was being carved into the identity of a community. And at the center of it all stood a young woman whose life would become forever connected to this tragedy. A student. A daughter. A friend. Someone who woke up that morning expecting an ordinary day. Someone who had plans beyond that afternoon. Someone who never imagined she would become the face of a national tragedy. Her name was Anastasia Rebecca de Souza. Before the day ended, people across Canada would know that name. But at this moment in our story, she was simply one among hundreds of students enjoying a lunch break. Living. Dreaming. Planning. Existing within the ordinary beauty of youth. The kind of ordinary beauty that is often invisible until it is gone. As emergency vehicles surrounded Dawson College and terrified students fled into nearby streets, a question hung over the city. How did a normal September afternoon become a nightmare? What transformed a college filled with ambition and possibility into the scene of one of Canada's most devastating school shootings? To answer that question, we must go back. Back before the sirens. Back before the headlines. Back before the gunfire shattered the afternoon. Back to the lives that existed before tragedy arrived. Because every true crime story begins long before the crime itself. And the story of Dawson College begins in a city that believed it was enjoying just another ordinary day. To understand what happened at Dawson College on September 13, 2006, we have to step away from the violence. We have to leave behind the flashing emergency lights, the frantic phone calls, the television headlines, and the images that would eventually be broadcast across the country. We have to return to a different Montreal. A quieter Montreal. A city still unaware of the tragedy waiting just beyond the horizon. In the autumn of 2006, Montreal was a city suspended between old and new. Historic stone buildings stood beside modern glass towers. French and English blended together in conversations drifting through cafes, subway stations, bookstores, and crowded sidewalks. It was a city built on contrasts. European elegance mixed with North American energy. Old traditions existed alongside youthful ambition. And nowhere was that youthful ambition more visible than in the colleges and universities scattered across the city. Every September, Montreal transformed. The summer tourists slowly disappeared. The leaves had not yet begun their full transformation into shades of gold and crimson, but the first hints of autumn were already present in the air. Students returned. Dormitories filled. Classrooms became crowded again. Coffee shops welcomed endless lines of exhausted young adults carrying textbooks and impossible schedules. The city became younger almost overnight. And among the institutions welcoming those students was Dawson College. Located in the heart of downtown Montreal, Dawson College was more than simply a school. It was a crossroads. Every day, thousands of students entered its doors carrying different backgrounds, different cultures, different dreams, and different futures. Some hoped to become doctors. Others dreamed of careers in business, education, science, engineering, art, or media. Some were unsure of where life would take them. Many were experiencing the first real taste of independence. For countless students, Dawson represented possibility. The building itself was impossible to ignore. Large, historic, and prominent, it stood like a landmark within the city. Its hallways carried the familiar atmosphere found in educational institutions around the world. Lockers lined corridors. Bulletin boards advertised student clubs and upcoming events. Classroom doors opened and closed throughout the day. Conversations echoed endlessly through common areas. The building was alive with motion. A constant stream of people moving toward their futures. On a typical weekday afternoon, the atrium served as the heart of that movement. Students gathered there between classes. Some studied. Some ate lunch. Some sat alone listening to music. Others met friends and talked for hours. It was a place filled with ordinary moments. The kinds of moments people rarely remember. A joke shared across a table. A glance exchanged between classmates. A text message sent while waiting for a lecture to begin. A discussion about plans for the weekend. Small moments that seem insignificant until history suddenly attaches meaning to them. September 13th began as exactly that kind of day. Ordinary. Predictable. Safe. The weather was pleasant. The city moved according to routine. Nothing in the morning suggested that the date would become permanently etched into Canadian memory. Students woke up in apartments, family homes, and residences throughout Montreal. Many complained about early classes. Some rushed through breakfast. Others skipped breakfast entirely. Assignments were discussed. Schedules were checked. Books were packed into backpacks. It was a morning that looked exactly like hundreds of mornings before it. Inside Dawson College, professors prepared lectures. Administrative staff handled paperwork. Maintenance workers moved through hallways. Security personnel followed familiar routines. Nobody sensed anything unusual. Nobody anticipated crisis. Because human beings depend upon routine. We trust it. We expect tomorrow to resemble yesterday. We build our lives around the assumption that ordinary days remain ordinary. Most of the time, that assumption is correct. Sometimes it isn't. Several kilometers away from the college, another routine was unfolding. A very different one. While students focused on classes and future careers, a man named Kimveer Singh Gill was moving through the final hours of a plan that investigators would later spend months trying to understand. At 25 years old, Gill occupied a very different world from the students who would soon cross his path. He lived in Laval, a suburban area north of Montreal. From the outside, his life did not immediately suggest the scale of violence that would eventually occur. Yet beneath the surface existed a growing darkness. People who later examined his online activity discovered a disturbing collection of photographs, writings, and expressions that painted a picture of profound alienation. The internet in 2006 was a different place. Social media existed, but not in the form we recognize today. Personal blogs and online communities often functioned as windows into private thoughts. Many individuals revealed aspects of themselves online that remained hidden in everyday life. Gill was one of them. The digital trail he left behind would become one of the most closely examined aspects of the investigation. Photographs showed a young man dressed in black. Weapons appeared frequently. Dark themes appeared repeatedly. Images projected intimidation, isolation, anger, a fascination with death. The internet allowed him to create a version of himself that seemed increasingly detached from ordinary society. Looking back, many observers would describe his online presence as alarming. But hindsight has a unique clarity. At the time, millions of people around the world posted disturbing content online. Most never harmed anyone. The challenge investigators would later face was determining where fantasy ended and intent began. What transformed dark fascination into real violence? What pushed someone beyond the boundary separating imagination from action? Those questions would remain largely unanswered. The deeper authorities looked into Gill's life, the more complicated the picture became. There was no single event. No obvious trigger. No simple explanation. Instead, investigators found fragments. Depression. Social isolation. Pessimism. A fixation on violence. Admiration for previous mass shootings. A growing sense of disconnection from the world around him. Yet even these pieces failed to provide a complete answer. Human beings often seek simple narratives after tragedy. A villain. A motive. A clear reason. Reality rarely cooperates. Real life is usually messier. The path toward violence often develops through countless small decisions, hidden struggles, personal obsessions, and psychological fractures invisible to outsiders. While Gill's inner world darkened, the students of Dawson College continued living within a completely different reality. One defined by hope. The contrast between those worlds is impossible to ignore. Inside the college, people were building futures. Outside the college, someone was preparing to destroy them. By late morning on September 13th, downtown Montreal had become increasingly busy. Traffic flowed through major streets. Office buildings filled with workers. Restaurants prepared for lunch crowds. Pedestrians crossed intersections beneath clear skies. Life moved forward with complete confidence in its own normalcy. At Dawson College, lunchtime approached. Students left classrooms and entered hallways. Groups formed naturally. Friends reunited between lectures. The building's energy shifted from academic focus toward social interaction. Laughter became more common. Voices became louder. The atrium gradually filled. It was one of those moments that exists on nearly every campus around the world. A pause between responsibilities. A brief opportunity to relax. To eat. To talk. To breathe. Nobody knew that many of those ordinary interactions were about to become final memories. One student discussed plans for the evening. Another worried about an upcoming exam. Someone else sent a text message. A group gathered around a table. A professor reviewed notes for the next class. Life continued exactly as intended. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of tragedies like Dawson College. They arrive without announcing themselves. There is no warning siren hours beforehand. No visible storm gathering in the distance. The world does not pause. The sun continues shining. People continue laughing. Coffee continues brewing. Traffic lights continue changing. Everything appears normal right until the moment normal disappears. For the city of Montreal, September 13th still belonged to the category of ordinary days. Parents expected to see their children that evening. Students expected to return home after class. Teachers expected another routine workday. The future felt predictable. But history often changes in moments that seem insignificant beforehand. A single decision. A single movement. A single individual carrying intentions nobody else can see. As noon approached, thousands of lives moved unknowingly toward the same point in time. Toward a moment that would permanently divide memory into two categories. Before the shooting. And after the shooting. The distance between those two worlds was now measured not in days or hours, but in minutes. And somewhere beyond the walls of Dawson College, a man carrying weapons was already moving toward the place where those worlds would collide. Before the headlines, before the memorials, before her name became forever linked to one of the darkest days in modern Canadian history, Anastasia Rebecca D'Souza was simply a young woman standing at the beginning of her life. That is often the first tragedy hidden inside every true crime story. The world eventually learns the victim's name. Newspapers print it. Television anchors repeat it. Investigators write it in reports. Historians preserve it in archives. Yet the person behind that name gradually risks becoming overshadowed by the crime itself. The violence grows larger than the life. The tragedy becomes more famous than the human being who suffered it. But long before September 13, 2006, Anastasia's story had nothing to do with gunfire. It was a story about family. About youth. About possibility. About a future still waiting to be written. She was 18 years old. An age balanced delicately between childhood and adulthood. Old enough to imagine an independent future. Young enough to still carry traces of the girl she had been only a few years earlier. For many people, 18 represents a beginning. New schools. New relationships. New responsibilities. New dreams. The world feels enormous at that age. Every decision seems capable of changing everything. Every year ahead appears filled with endless possibilities. Friends become companions for late-night conversations about the future. Plans stretch decades into the distance. Life feels permanent. Time feels unlimited. Like many students at Dawson College, Anastasia belonged to a generation standing on the edge of adulthood. The college represented opportunity. A bridge connecting who she was to who she hoped to become. Every classroom, every assignment, every semester carried the promise of progress. The promise that tomorrow could be better than today. That effort would eventually become achievement. That dreams could become reality. People who knew her described someone full of warmth and energy. Someone whose presence could brighten a room. Someone whose life was measured not by tragedy but by relationships. The relationships that matter most are often invisible to strangers. The private jokes shared with siblings. The conversations with parents. The friendships built slowly over years. The quiet moments around dinner tables. The ordinary interactions that form the foundation of a life. Those moments rarely appear in history books. Yet they are what make a person real. For her family, Anastasia was not a future headline. She was a daughter. A source of laughter. A source of pride. Someone whose voice was familiar within the home. Someone whose absence would eventually become unbearable. On the morning of September 13th, nothing distinguished that day from countless others. Like thousands of students throughout Montreal, she woke up expecting normalcy. There was no reason to believe otherwise. The weather was pleasant. Classes awaited. The future remained intact. Perhaps she thought about assignments. Perhaps she considered plans for later in the week. Perhaps she worried about ordinary concerns that seem so important at 18. Nobody can know every thought that passed through her mind that morning. What we do know is that she began the day as millions of students begin their days. Focused on living, not surviving. That distinction matters. Because hindsight often tempts us to view victims only through the lens of what happened to them. But Anastasia did not wake up as a victim. She woke up as a young woman continuing her life. A life filled with ambitions, routines, relationships, and expectations. A life moving forward. Across the city, parents sent their children to school. Students boarded buses. Others drove. Some walked. The familiar rhythm of another academic day unfolded without interruption. For Anastasia, Dawson College was part of that rhythm. The hallways. The classrooms. The familiar faces. The routines that become comforting through repetition. Educational institutions often function as small worlds unto themselves. Students create friendships, build identities, develop confidence, imagine futures. Entire chapters of life unfold within those walls. For young adults especially, college becomes more than a place of learning. It becomes a place of becoming. The version of yourself that enters often differs from the version that leaves. Every semester contributes something. Knowledge, experience, perspective, growth. And like so many students around her, Anastasia was navigating that journey. Her story should have continued naturally. Graduation, career opportunities, relationships, adventures. The countless milestones that families quietly anticipate when watching a young person mature. The future was supposed to remain open, unwritten. That is what makes violent crime so profoundly unsettling. It interrupts stories. Not only the life that ends, but the future that disappears alongside it. Every victim carries unrealized years within them. Future birthdays. Future celebrations. Future disappointments. Future victories. Entire decades that vanish in a single moment. Those lost possibilities cannot be measured. They exist only in imagination. Yet their absence echoes through generations. For Anastasia's family, September 13th would eventually become far more than a date. It would become a dividing line. Life before. Life after. Families affected by sudden violence often describe time in exactly those terms. The event becomes a permanent reference point. Every memory acquires a location relative to the tragedy. Before it happened. Or after it happened. The simplicity of that division hides immense pain. Because the world continues moving. Days pass. Months pass. Years pass. Yet grief frequently remains frozen. The memory stays vivid while everything else changes. On the morning of September 13th, however, none of that pain existed yet. The future remained untouched. The family had no reason to anticipate loss. There were no warning signs. No final goodbyes waited with special meaning. No dramatic foreshadowing. Just another ordinary morning. And perhaps that is one of the cruelest truths surrounding sudden violence. Most final conversations never sound final. Parents say goodbye expecting to see their children later. Friends make plans for the weekend. People leave home assuming they will return. Life depends upon that assumption. Human beings could not function otherwise. We trust tomorrow. We trust routine. We trust that ordinary days will remain ordinary. For thousands of years, that trust has allowed civilization to exist. Occasionally, that trust is shattered. At Dawson College, lunchtime approached. The building gradually filled with the sounds of student life. Footsteps echoed through hallways. Conversations overlapped. Doors opened and closed. Backpacks rested beside chairs. The atmosphere reflected exactly what colleges are meant to represent: learning, community, opportunity, hope. Among the students moving through those spaces was Anastasia. One individual among thousands. Unaware that history was approaching. Unaware that investigators, journalists, politicians, and documentary filmmakers would one day speak her name. Unaware that her story was about to become part of a national tragedy. Victims of mass violence are often remembered through statistics. 1 dead. 19 injured. 2 fatalities. Numbers appear in reports because numbers are easy to organize. But numbers conceal as much as they reveal. They flatten human lives into categories. Anastasia was not a statistic. She was not an entry in a database. She was not merely the deceased victim in a criminal investigation. She was a daughter whose family loved her. A friend whose absence would be noticed immediately. A student with goals. A young woman with a future. Every person who crossed paths with her carried a slightly different version of who she was. To one friend, she may have been the person who always knew how to make them laugh. To another, the person who listened without judgment. To family members, she may have represented countless memories stretching back to childhood. Birthday celebrations. School achievements. Family gatherings. Vacations. Photographs. Moments that seemed ordinary at the time but would later become priceless. This is what tragedy steals. Not merely life itself, but the continuity of life. The ability to create new memories. To add chapters. To continue becoming. As the afternoon moved closer, students throughout Dawson College remained immersed in their own worlds. Some worried about grades. Others thought about relationships. Many simply looked forward to the end of classes. The concerns of everyday life filled the building. Normal concerns. Healthy concerns. The concerns of people expecting a future. Outside the college, traffic continued flowing through Montreal. The city remained unaware. Restaurants served lunch. Office workers checked emails. Storefronts welcomed customers. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Yet hidden within that ordinary afternoon was a terrible countdown. Not one visible on clocks. Not one recognized by students or teachers. A countdown known only to the man moving toward the college with weapons and intent. For everyone else, the day remained ordinary. And because it remained ordinary, nobody felt afraid. Nobody scanned entrances for danger. Nobody imagined violence erupting in the center of campus. The students of Dawson College believed they were safe. It was a reasonable belief. Schools are supposed to be safe. Classrooms are supposed to be safe. Places dedicated to learning are supposed to protect possibility rather than destroy it. That expectation forms an unspoken contract between society and its young people. Go to school. Learn. Grow. Build a future. You will be safe there. On September 13th, that contract would be broken. And among the countless lives affected, one name would become forever associated with the cost of that betrayal. Anastasia Rebecca de Souza. An 18-year-old student whose story should have extended far beyond a single afternoon. A young woman who arrived at Dawson College expecting another day of classes. A daughter who left home expecting to return. A future that still seemed limitless. For now, she remained unaware of what was coming. The hallways remained crowded. The conversations continued. The lunch hour approached. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. And somewhere beyond the walls of the college, the final minutes before disaster were slipping away. At 12:42 p.m., the ordinary rhythm of Dawson College ended. Not gradually. Not with warning. One moment, students were living inside the familiar comfort of a Wednesday afternoon. The next, fear exploded through the campus. For the people who were there, The memory would remain frozen in fragments. A conversation interrupted. A backpack slipping from someone's shoulder. A chair scraping across a floor. A sudden noise that didn't seem to belong. Then another. Then another. At first, many students struggled to understand what they were hearing. The human mind has a remarkable tendency to reject terrible possibilities, especially in places where violence feels impossible. A college campus is not supposed to sound like a battlefield. A school is supposed to be a place of lectures, discussions, exams, and plans for the future. Not gunfire. Not panic. Not survival. Outside the college, Kimveer Singh Gill had arrived carrying weapons and intentions that nobody around him could fully comprehend. He was 25 years old. Dressed in dark clothing. Moving toward a building filled with young people who had never met him. Young people who had done nothing to him. Young people who had no idea their lives were about to change forever. The first shots shattered more than glass and concrete. They shattered assumptions. The assumption that this was an ordinary day. The assumption that everyone would return home. The assumption that danger existed somewhere else. As the gunfire began, confusion spread almost instantly. Students turned toward the sound. Some stood up. Others paused in mid-conversation. Many searched the faces around them for answers. Nobody had any. The transition from confusion to terror happened within seconds. Once people realized what was happening, instinct took over. The atrium erupted into movement. Hundreds of students began running. Some sprinted toward exits. Others dove behind pillars and walls. Many simply followed the crowd. In moments of crisis, people often do not make conscious decisions. They react. The body takes control. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream. The heart accelerates. Breathing becomes shallow. The world narrows. Suddenly, only a few things matter. Find safety. Keep moving. Stay alive. Witnesses later described scenes of chaos unfolding throughout the college. Students stumbled while trying to escape. Friends became separated from one another. People screamed warnings. Others froze completely, unable to process what they were seeing. Fear affects everyone differently. Some run. Some hide. Some become strangely calm. Others experience a kind of paralysis. Inside Dawson College, every one of those reactions unfolded simultaneously. The building had become a maze of uncertainty. Nobody knew exactly where the shooter was. Nobody knew where he might go next. Nobody knew how many people had been injured. The absence of information became its own source of terror. Every hallway suddenly felt dangerous. Every corner felt threatening. Every sound carried new meaning. A door slamming somewhere nearby. Footsteps. Shouting. The distant echoes of panic. Students crowded into classrooms. Some barricaded doors. Others hid beneath desks. Many crouched silently against walls, listening. Waiting. Hoping. Praying. Cell phones appeared everywhere. Hands trembling. Voices breaking. Messages sent in desperation. Parents received calls they would never forget. Some answered to hear crying. Others heard whispers. A few heard nothing but breathing and fear. Across Montreal, families began receiving fragments of information. There was a shooting. Something terrible had happened. Students were trapped. Police were responding. But details remained scarce. Television stations interrupted programming. Newsrooms scrambled. Reporters rushed toward the scene. The city suddenly found itself confronting a nightmare. Meanwhile, inside the college, time behaved differently. Minutes felt endless. People hiding in classrooms later described the experience as surreal. The outside world seemed to disappear. There were no schedules anymore. No classes. No assignments. No ordinary concerns. Only uncertainty. Only waiting. Only fear. For many students, the most frightening aspect was not knowing what would happen next. Violence creates immediate terror. Uncertainty extends it. Nobody knew when the shooting would stop. Nobody knew whether the danger was moving closer. Nobody knew whether they would emerge safely. Human beings are not built for prolonged uncertainty. The imagination fills gaps quickly. Every unexplained sound becomes a threat. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every passing second feels significant. Throughout the building, survival instincts took over. Some students helped others find shelter. Some held doors closed. Others comforted frightened classmates. Even amid panic, acts of courage emerged. Not dramatic movie-style heroics. Something quieter. Someone helping another person stand. Someone guiding strangers toward safety. Someone refusing to leave a frightened friend behind. These moments rarely become headlines. Yet they reveal something important. In moments of darkness, humanity often reveals its best qualities alongside its worst tragedies. While terror spread through Dawson College, emergency responders raced toward the scene. Police officers received reports of an active shooter. Information arrived rapidly and often inconsistently. The situation was evolving by the minute. Every decision carried enormous consequences. Officers understood the urgency. Every second mattered. Lives depended upon speed. The challenge facing responding officers was immense. They were entering a rapidly unfolding crisis with incomplete information. They knew an armed individual was inside or near the college. They knew students were in danger. They knew hesitation could cost lives. As police converged on the area, downtown Montreal began transforming. Traffic slowed. Streets filled with emergency vehicles. Concerned parents rushed toward the campus. News helicopters appeared overhead. Crowds gathered behind police barriers. The city watched events unfold in real time. Yet nobody outside the college could truly understand what students inside were experiencing. Inside, the world had become smaller. A classroom. A stairwell. A locked door. A hiding place. For those trapped within the building, survival existed minute by minute. Outside, police worked rapidly to locate and stop the gunman. The confrontation that followed would ultimately prevent even greater loss of life. Authorities closed in. The distance between the shooter and responding officers continued shrinking. Eventually, police made contact. The crisis approached its final moments. One officer fired and struck Gill in the arm. The encounter lasted only a brief period. Yet the consequences of everything leading to that moment would endure for years. Immediately after being wounded, Gill turned a weapon on himself. The attack was over. Just like that. The violence that had transformed an ordinary afternoon into a national tragedy ended as abruptly as it had begun. But endings are complicated. Because although the shooting itself had stopped, its impact had only begun. Inside Dawson College, students remained frightened and confused. Many did not immediately know the danger had passed. Police officers moved through the building. Rooms were cleared. Students were evacuated. Instructors accounted for classmates. Friends searched desperately for friends. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Who was hurt? Who was safe? Who had been taken to hospitals? Who was missing? In the aftermath of mass violence, information rarely arrives in a neat sequence. Instead, it comes in fragments. Rumors spread. Fears grow. People cling to any piece of news they can find. Across Montreal, families waited anxiously. Phones rang continuously. Television coverage intensified. Hospitals prepared for incoming patients. The entire city seemed to hold its breath. Then the reality of the casualties gradually emerged. 19 people had been injured. Some seriously. Lives had been altered in ways that would never fully heal. And among the victims was an 18-year-old student named Anastasia Rebecca de Souza. For her family, the world would never return to what it had been that morning. Hours earlier, she had simply been a young woman attending college. A daughter. A friend. A student with plans for the future. Now her name was becoming part of a tragedy that would be remembered across Canada. The loss extended far beyond one individual. Friends would grieve. Classmates would struggle to understand. Professors would remember empty seats. Family members would confront an absence that could never be filled. Violence always reaches farther than the immediate moment. It spreads outward through relationships, through communities, through memory. As evening approached, Dawson College stood transformed. The same hallways that had echoed with ordinary conversations earlier that day now carried the weight of trauma. The same atrium where students had gathered for lunch had become part of a crime scene. The same campus that symbolized education and opportunity now carried the scars of violence. For survivors, the experience would not end when they left the building. Trauma rarely works that way. Many would replay moments repeatedly in their minds. The sounds, the confusion, the fear, the desperate rush to safety, the uncertainty. Even years later, certain memories would remain vivid. A face, a hallway, a particular moment frozen in time. The shooting itself had lasted a relatively short period. Its psychological impact would last much longer. Some survivors would later struggle with anxiety. Others would experience recurring memories. Many would find that ordinary places suddenly felt different. Safety, once taken for granted, had become something more fragile, more complicated, more uncertain. As darkness settled over Montreal that evening, the city attempted to comprehend what had happened. People searched for explanations. They searched for motives. They searched for meaning. But tragedy rarely provides satisfying answers. The attack at Dawson College had begun with a single individual carrying violence into a place of learning. It ended with families grieving, survivors recovering, and an entire community asking how such a thing could happen. The gunfire had stopped. The immediate danger was gone. But the story of Dawson College was far from over. The investigation was only beginning. And hidden within the life of the man responsible were questions that investigators, journalists, psychologists, and the public would spend years trying to answer. Questions about warning signs. Questions about obsession. Questions about isolation. Questions that became even more urgent after the smoke of chaos had cleared. Because once the terror of that afternoon faded, another challenge emerged. Understanding why it happened at all. When the shooting stopped, silence did not immediately return. What returned first was uncertainty. The kind of uncertainty that settles over a crime scene before anyone fully understands what has happened. Inside Dawson College, police officers moved carefully through hallways that only an hour earlier had been crowded with students. Classroom doors were opened one by one. Stairwells were checked. Common areas were secured. Every room represented a question that still needed an answer. Was anyone still injured inside? Was there another threat? Had the attacker acted alone? In the earliest moments after a mass casualty event, investigators cannot afford assumptions. Every possibility must be considered. Every unknown must be treated as a danger. For students emerging from hiding places, the transition felt surreal. Some stepped out from classrooms after spending what felt like an eternity pressed against walls or crouched beneath desks. Others emerged from storage rooms, offices, and corners of the building where they had remained frozen in fear. Many were shaking. Some were crying. Others appeared strangely emotionless. Trauma often arrives before emotion. The brain focuses first on survival. Understanding comes later. Police directed students toward exits. Groups formed outside the building. Friends searched frantically for one another. Names were called repeatedly. Cell phones continued ringing. Messages flooded through networks across Montreal. Parents raced toward the campus hoping to find their children among the survivors gathering beyond the police perimeter. Some reunions happened quickly. Others did not. Those waiting experienced a special kind of agony. Minutes stretched endlessly. Every passing second seemed to create new fears. Inside the college, the investigation had already begun. The building was no longer simply a school. It had become a crime scene. And crime scenes tell stories. Not complete stories. Not perfect stories. But fragments. Pieces of truth left behind by violence. The challenge for investigators is learning how to read them. Officers began documenting everything. Photographs. Measurements. Locations. Evidence collection starts with preservation. Before questions can be answered, facts must be protected. The scene inside Dawson College represented organized chaos. The aftermath of panic leaves its own signature. Abandoned backpacks. Books scattered across floors. Personal belongings dropped during attempts to flee. Chairs overturned. Food left untouched on tables. Every object seemed frozen between ordinary life and extraordinary violence. One of the most unsettling aspects of crime scenes involving public spaces is the evidence of interruption. Life simply stops. A notebook remains open to a page that will never be finished. A meal sits abandoned halfway through lunch. A conversation ends in the middle of a sentence. The ordinary collides with the horrific. Inside Dawson College, investigators encountered countless reminders that hundreds of students had been living normal lives only moments before the attack began. Now those ordinary moments existed alongside evidence markers and police tape. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Outside, media coverage intensified. News organizations across Canada focused their attention on Montreal. Reporters gathered near the college. Camera crews positioned themselves behind police lines. The public demanded answers. Who was responsible? How many people were hurt? Why had this happened? Authorities faced pressure from every direction. Families wanted information. Journalists wanted updates. The community wanted reassurance. Investigators, however, understood that answers require time. And time was something few people were willing to give. Within the secured areas of the college, forensic teams continued their work. Each piece of evidence contributed to a larger picture. Investigators sought to establish a precise timeline. When had the attacker arrived? Where had he moved? How long had the shooting lasted? Which events occurred first? Which occurred last? These questions might appear simple from the outside. In reality, they are rarely straightforward. Witnesses experience traumatic events differently. Memory becomes fragmented. People observe only portions of what unfolds around them. Two individuals standing only meters apart can remember the same event in dramatically different ways. That is not dishonesty. It is human psychology. Trauma changes perception. Investigators therefore rely on multiple sources. Witness statements. Physical evidence. Photographs. Surveillance footage when available. Every source contributes another piece to the puzzle. The process resembles assembling a shattered mirror. No single fragment reveals the entire reflection. Only when combined do the pieces begin to make sense. As investigators worked through the scene, another question demanded immediate attention. Who was the attacker? Although the gunman was dead, understanding his identity remained essential. Mass violence does not end when the shooting stops. Communities need explanations. Authorities need context. Investigators need motive. The dead still leave trails. And those trails often become the most important evidence of all. The first information about Kimveer Singh Gill emerged relatively quickly. His identity was confirmed. His residence in Larval was identified. His background became a priority. Soon investigators expanded beyond the college itself. The crime scene was no longer confined to Dawson College. It extended into the shooter's past. Every location connected to him became relevant. Every document. Every photograph. Every computer file. Every relationship. Investigators understand an uncomfortable truth. Violent acts rarely emerge from nothing. The final event may appear sudden. The path leading toward it usually is not. Somewhere in that path, clues often exist. Whether those clues were visible beforehand is a different question entirely. At Gill's residence, authorities began searching for answers. What they discovered painted the outline of a deeply troubled individual. Investigators found evidence suggesting a long-standing fascination with violence. Weapons, images, written material, online activity. Each discovery raised additional questions. The portrait that gradually emerged was disturbing. Yet it was also incomplete. That incompleteness frustrated investigators. People naturally expect a clear motive, a dramatic revelation, a single explanation capable of making sense of everything. Real investigations rarely provide such satisfaction. Instead, investigators found layers: isolation, alienation, dark fantasies, expressions of despair, interest in previous acts of mass violence. The pieces existed. The challenge was determining how they fit together. Back at Dawson College, witness interviews continued. Hundreds of students and staff had experienced the attack from different perspectives. Some saw the shooter. Others heard only gunfire. Many observed fragments rather than complete sequences of events. Interviewing witnesses after trauma requires patience. Investigators cannot simply demand perfect recollections. Memory under stress behaves unpredictably. Certain details become extraordinarily vivid. Others disappear entirely. One witness might remember a specific facial expression. Another might remember the color of clothing. A third might recall only the overwhelming sensation of fear. Taken individually, these memories may seem limited. Together, they become invaluable. As statements accumulated, investigators began constructing a clearer timeline of the attack. The movement of the shooter, the locations involved, the sequence of critical moments, the police response. Each new detail sharpened understanding. Yet understanding the mechanics of the attack was only part of the mission. The larger question remained. Why? Why had a 25-year-old man armed himself and entered a college? Why had he chosen Dawson? Why that day? Why those victims? These questions echoed far beyond the investigation. They spread through news broadcasts, dinner table conversations, classrooms, and government offices. The public wanted certainty. Unfortunately, certainty would remain elusive. Many of the most important answers had died with the shooter. This is one of the cruel realities investigators face in cases involving offender suicide. The person most capable of explaining motive is no longer available to question. Everything afterward becomes reconstruction, inference, analysis, an attempt to understand a mind that can no longer speak for itself. As evening approached, forensic work continued beneath artificial lighting. Crime scene investigations are rarely as dramatic as films portray them. They are meticulous, slow, methodical. Investigators move carefully because mistakes matter. A single overlooked detail can alter an entire understanding of events. The work requires discipline, patience, precision. Hours after the shooting, Dawson College remained surrounded by police activity. Students had left. Classes had ended. But the investigation was only beginning. The building felt different now. Not because its walls had changed. Because its meaning had changed. Places touched by tragedy acquire a new identity. People remember them differently. Future visitors see what happened there even when no visible evidence remains. The same hallways would eventually reopen. Students would return. Education would continue. Yet September 13, 2006, would never completely disappear from those spaces. Memory would remain. Invisible but present. Throughout the night, hospitals treated the wounded. Families gathered beside loved ones. Doctors worked to stabilize injuries. An entirely separate struggle was unfolding away from the crime scene. The struggle to survive. The struggle to heal. The struggle to comprehend. For survivors, Recovery would not be measured in hours or days. It would be measured in months and years. Physical wounds might heal. Psychological wounds often move according to a different timeline. Meanwhile, investigators continued pursuing every lead available. The immediate facts of the attack were becoming clearer. The deeper story remained hidden. Who exactly was Kimveer Singh Gill? What had shaped his worldview? What warning signs existed? Had anyone recognized them? Could intervention have changed the outcome? These questions transformed the investigation from a simple reconstruction of events into something much larger. An exploration of causes. An examination of warning signs. An attempt to understand how despair, obsession, and violence had converged inside one individual. The crime scene at Dawson College revealed what happened. The investigation into the gunman's life would attempt to explain why. And as detectives dug deeper into that life, they would uncover a trail of troubling clues that, viewed through the lens of hindsight, appeared increasingly difficult to ignore. The answers would not arrive all at once. They would emerge piece by piece. A photograph here. An online post there. A pattern gradually taking shape. The deeper investigators looked, the more they realized that the story of Dawson College had begun long before September 13th. The shooting was not the beginning. It was the end of a much longer and darker journey. A journey whose warning signs had been scattered across years, waiting for someone to recognize them before tragedy finally arrived. In the days following the Dawson College shooting, investigators found themselves facing a familiar challenge that emerges after nearly every act of mass violence. The public wanted a simple answer. Investigators rarely get one. People naturally search for a clear cause after tragedy. A single event. A single failure. A single explanation capable of transforming chaos into something understandable. But human beings are not machines. Violence is rarely created by one moment. Instead, it develops gradually, hidden beneath years of experiences, emotions, decisions, frustrations, fantasies, and personal struggles. As detectives, forensic analysts, psychologists, and intelligence specialists began reconstructing the life of Kimveer Singh Gill, they quickly discovered that understanding him would be far more complicated than simply identifying his weapons or retracing his movements on September 13th. The shooting itself had lasted only minutes. The path leading toward it appeared to stretch back years. Initially, investigators explored every possibility. Whenever a mass casualty attack occurs, authorities must determine whether the perpetrator acted alone or as part of something larger. Was there another individual involved? Did anyone know about the plan? Did anyone assist him? Had he communicated his intentions to someone beforehand? These questions were critical. The answers could determine whether additional threats still existed. At first, uncertainty surrounded nearly every aspect of the case. Witnesses offered different observations. Media speculation intensified. Rumors spread through online forums and news reports. Some people believed the attack had been carefully coordinated. Others wondered whether ideological motivations might eventually emerge. Authorities could not dismiss any theory without investigation. Every lead required examination. Every possibility required verification. Detectives reviewed communications. They analyzed personal contacts. They reconstructed timelines. They searched for evidence of accomplices. Gradually, however, a clearer picture emerged. The evidence consistently pointed toward a lone offender. No hidden network appeared. No larger conspiracy surfaced. No secret organization emerged from the investigation. The attack appeared to be the product of one individual. One mind. One decision. One act of devastating violence. Yet proving that conclusion required extensive work. Investigators cannot simply assume isolation. They must establish it through evidence. As days passed, attention increasingly shifted toward understanding the psychological landscape that existed inside Gill's life. And it was here that investigators encountered one of the most troubling aspects of the case. The Internet. By 2006, Online communities had become important parts of everyday life. People shared thoughts, photographs, opinions, and identities in digital spaces that often felt detached from reality. But investigators understand something important. Digital footprints frequently reveal aspects of a person that remain hidden offline. Computers do not merely store information. They preserve fragments of personality. Search histories, images, messages, blogs, profiles. Each piece contributes to a larger portrait. When authorities examined Gill's online activity, they discovered material that immediately attracted attention. Photographs showed him posing with weapons. Dark clothing appeared frequently. The imagery seemed carefully constructed. The photographs projected menace, isolation, power. The kind of identity someone deliberately creates rather than accidentally reveals. Investigators studied these images closely, not because photographs themselves prove criminal intent, but because they provide context. They help establish patterns. The deeper investigators looked, the more unsettling those patterns became. Online writings revealed a worldview saturated with darkness. Expressions of hopelessness appeared repeatedly. Alienation appeared repeatedly. References to death appeared repeatedly. The language often suggested someone who felt disconnected from ordinary life. Someone observing the world from the outside rather than participating in it. Psychologists involved in understanding similar cases often describe a process of progressive withdrawal. Not necessarily physical withdrawal. Emotional withdrawal. The gradual development of an identity built around resentment, pessimism, or despair. Investigators wondered whether that process had unfolded here. But questions remained. Many people experience depression. Many people struggle with isolation. Many people express dark thoughts online. The overwhelming majority never commit violence. Therefore, investigators needed to identify what distinguished Gill from countless others experiencing similar emotions. That distinction became one of the most difficult aspects of the entire investigation. The deeper they looked, the more they encountered ambiguity. No single document explained everything. No diary entry provided a complete confession. No letter revealed a perfectly coherent motive. Instead, investigators found fragments. Pieces that suggested direction without delivering certainty. Among the most concerning discoveries was evidence of fascination with previous mass shootings. This immediately drew attention. History shows that some attackers study earlier acts of violence. They examine them, analyze them, sometimes even admire them. Investigators sought to determine whether Dawson College represented part of that pattern. Had Gill been influenced by earlier attacks? Was he attempting to imitate them? Or was his interest merely another symptom of a broader obsession? Again, certainty proved elusive. The evidence suggested fascination. Whether that fascination directly motivated the attack remained more difficult to establish. Throughout the investigation, authorities repeatedly confronted the limitations of hindsight. After tragedy occurs, warning signs often appear obvious. The human brain naturally reconstructs events into narratives. We look backward and connect details that previously seemed unrelated. A disturbing photograph suddenly feels significant. An unusual comment suddenly appears alarming. A troubling interest suddenly becomes meaningful. But before violence occurs, the situation is rarely so clear. Investigators knew this. They understood the danger of imposing certainty onto ambiguity. The challenge was identifying which warning signs genuinely mattered. Which signs could have predicted violence. Which signs only appeared important after the fact. That distinction remains one of the most difficult questions in threat assessment. The Dawson investigation became part of a larger conversation taking place throughout North America. How do societies recognize danger before violence occurs? How do institutions distinguish between troubled individuals and genuinely dangerous ones? How can intervention occur without unfairly targeting people who pose no threat? These questions extended far beyond one case. Yet Dawson College forced them into public view once again. As investigators continued their work, they interviewed individuals who had known Gil at different stages of his life. Friends, acquaintances, people who had interacted with him socially. The accounts varied. Some described him as quiet. Others described him as withdrawn. Several recalled his fascination with weapons and dark imagery. Yet many struggled to reconcile those memories with the scale of violence that eventually occurred. This reaction is common after mass shootings. People search their memories for explanations. They revisit conversations, re-examine encounters, question whether they missed something important. Could they have recognized the danger? Could they have prevented it? These questions often haunt individuals long after investigations conclude. Unfortunately, they rarely produce satisfying answers. Because human behavior remains unpredictable. The same characteristics that appear threatening in one person may never lead to violence in another. Investigators eventually concluded that Gil's life reflected a convergence of multiple risk factors: isolation, psychological distress, obsessive interests, pessimistic thinking, a fascination with violence. Yet even together, these elements failed to create a complete explanation. The absence of a definitive motive frustrated many observers. People wanted certainty. Instead, they received probabilities, possibilities, interpretations. The investigation revealed what Gil appeared to think about. What interested him? What disturbed him? What consumed his attention? But understanding why one particular day became the day of violence remained more difficult. Some crimes offer clear motives: financial gain, revenge, jealousy, personal conflict. The Dawson College shooting did not fit comfortably into those categories. The victims had no meaningful relationship with the shooter. The attack was not directed toward a specific individual with whom he had a documented dispute. Instead, investigators found themselves examining a broader pattern of despair, anger, and violent fantasy. The challenge was translating that pattern into understanding. And understanding remained incomplete. As weeks passed, the investigation gradually shifted from active crisis response toward comprehensive analysis. Authorities had already established the core facts. Gil acted alone. He carried multiple firearms. He opened fire at Dawson College. Police intervened. The attack ended with his death. Those facts were clear. What remained unclear were the deeper lessons. Every major act of violence generates questions extending beyond the perpetrator. Questions about systems, communities, institutions, warning signs, prevention. Could anything have interrupted the path leading toward September 13th? Could anyone have recognized the danger sooner? Or was the tragedy destined to remain invisible until the moment violence began? Investigators could not answer those questions with complete confidence. Neither could psychologists. Neither could policymakers. Yet the questions persisted. And perhaps that persistence reveals something important. Mass violence often creates an illusion that there must be a hidden solution waiting to be discovered. A warning sign that was missed. A clue that should have been recognized. A decision that could have changed everything. Sometimes those factors exist. Sometimes they do not. Reality is rarely neat. The Dawson College investigation demonstrated exactly how difficult prevention can be. The signs appeared significant after the attack. Before the attack, many of those same signs existed within a world filled with uncertainty. By the end of the investigation's early stages, authorities had assembled a clearer portrait of Kimveer Singh Gill than ever before. Yet the portrait remained incomplete. Pieces fit together. Others did not. The image was recognizable but unfinished. And within that unfinished portrait existed a troubling truth. The attack had not emerged from a single moment of madness. It appeared to be the final expression of a darkness that had been developing for years. The challenge now was determining exactly how that darkness evolved. Because somewhere within the photographs, writings, obsessions, and private struggles lay the closest thing investigators would ever find to an explanation. The breakthrough was coming. Not in the form of a dramatic confession or hidden accomplice, but through something more revealing. The gradual discovery of a mind that had been documenting its own descent long before anyone realized where that descent would end. In many criminal investigations, the breakthrough arrives dramatically. A hidden witness steps forward. A forgotten piece of evidence is discovered. A suspect finally confesses. The Dawson College investigation unfolded differently. The breakthrough did not come from a single revelation. It emerged slowly, piece by piece, as investigators reconstructed the inner world of a man who was no longer alive to explain himself. The challenge facing authorities was unique. The attacker was dead. There would be no interrogation room. No hours of questioning. No opportunity to confront him with evidence. No chance to observe his reactions. Everything investigators hoped to learn would have to come from what he left behind. And what he left behind proved deeply unsettling. As forensic teams continued examining computers, digital records, photographs, writings, and personal possessions, a clearer image began to emerge. Not a complete image. Not a perfect explanation. But enough to reveal a disturbing trajectory. Investigators discovered that many of the answers they sought had been visible long before September 13th. Not obvious enough to predict tragedy with certainty, but visible enough to reveal the evolution of a troubled mind. The deeper they looked into Gill's online presence, the more concerning the pattern became. His digital footprint appeared less like a collection of random interests and more like a carefully constructed identity. The internet had become a place where he expressed thoughts and fascinations that remained largely hidden from the broader public. Photographs repeatedly portrayed him alongside weapons, dark clothing, aggressive imagery, expressions designed to communicate menace rather than connection. Investigators began to realize these images were not isolated acts of self-expression. Together they formed a narrative. A narrative centered around violence, alienation, and power. Psychologists reviewing similar cases often observe that some individuals gradually build identities around fantasies rather than realities. The fantasy becomes more important than everyday life. The imagined self becomes more compelling than the actual self. Over time, the distance between those two versions can grow dangerously large. Investigators wondered whether that process had occurred here. The evidence increasingly suggested it had. One of the most significant discoveries involved Gill's writings. While no single statement provided a complete motive, many revealed recurring themes. Isolation, anger, hopelessness, disconnection. Repeated references to death and violence appeared throughout the material investigators reviewed. The writings painted a picture of someone who felt separated from the world around him. Someone who viewed life through a lens of pessimism and resentment. Someone struggling to establish meaningful connections. Yet even these discoveries presented complications. Many people experience loneliness. Many struggle with depression. Many express dark thoughts. Investigators understood they could not simply point to emotional suffering as an explanation for mass violence. The overwhelming majority of people facing similar struggles never harm anyone. The breakthrough therefore required a more nuanced understanding. Authorities needed to identify not merely what Gill felt. They needed to understand what made his situation different. As analysts continued examining evidence, another pattern became increasingly difficult to ignore. His fascination with previous mass shootings. This discovery did not provide a motive. But it did provide context. Investigators found indications that Gill had shown interest in earlier attacks carried out by other perpetrators. Events that had shocked communities elsewhere appeared to occupy a significant place within his imagination. For investigators, this mattered. Because mass violence sometimes develops through a process of identification. Certain offenders do not simply commit violence. They study it. They absorb it. They become fascinated by individuals who committed similar acts before them. The previous attacker becomes more than a criminal. He becomes a symbol. An object of obsession. A distorted model to emulate. The Dawson investigation could not establish every detail of Gill's thinking. But evidence suggested that earlier mass shootings had influenced the environment in which his own fantasies developed. This realization represented a critical breakthrough. Not because it answered every question. Because it shifted the focus of the investigation. The mystery was no longer centered solely on what happened at Dawson College. It now included understanding how violent ideation had evolved over time. The attack began to appear less like a sudden explosion and more like the final stage of a prolonged internal process. Months of investigation continued reinforcing this conclusion. Experts reviewed behavior patterns, digital records, personal history, social interactions. The pieces gradually aligned. Gill appeared to have spent years moving deeper into isolation. Years reinforcing negative beliefs. Years nurturing fantasies disconnected from ordinary life. Years building an identity increasingly centered on darkness. This did not excuse his actions. Nothing could. But it helped investigators understand the road leading toward them. One of the most revealing aspects of the investigation involved the contrast between appearance and reality. Many people who crossed paths with Gill never imagined he would commit mass murder. Some remembered him as quiet. Others described him as socially awkward. A few recalled interests that seemed unusual or concerning. Yet almost nobody anticipated the violence that would eventually occur. This discrepancy fascinated investigators. How could someone leave behind so many warning signs while remaining largely invisible as a threat? The answer lay partly in the nature of warning signs themselves. Human beings often expect danger to announce itself clearly. Reality is different. Warning signs are usually ambiguous. A troubling comment. A disturbing photograph. An obsession that seems unhealthy. Viewed individually, these behaviors may not appear alarming enough to justify intervention. Viewed collectively and in hindsight, they tell a different story. The Dawson case became an example of that challenge. Investigators recognized patterns after the attack that might have seemed less obvious beforehand. This realization contributed to broader discussions across Canada regarding threat assessment and prevention. Could institutions identify dangerous individuals earlier? Could online behavior provide meaningful warnings? Could intervention occur before fantasies transformed into action? These questions extended far beyond Dawson College. Yet the investigation helped bring them into sharper focus. Another significant discovery emerged from evidence suggesting that the attack had not been impulsive. Planning had occurred. Preparation had occurred. The violence was not the product of a sudden argument or emotional outburst. Investigators concluded that the events of September 13 represented a deliberate act. This finding changed the psychological interpretation of the case. Impulsive violence often emerges from immediate circumstances. Planned violence develops differently. It requires time, thought, preparation, commitment. Each step toward execution represents another decision, another opportunity to turn back. The existence of planning suggested that Gill had crossed those decision points repeatedly. This realization made the case even more troubling, because it indicated persistence. The attack was not a momentary loss of control. It was the culmination of an evolving intention. As investigators assembled the final pieces of their analysis, a broader understanding emerged. The breakthrough was not a single clue. It was a pattern. A convergence of factors. Isolation combined with violent fascination. Psychological distress combined with pessimistic thinking. Identification with previous attackers combined with access to weapons. None of these elements alone explained the tragedy. Together they created a framework. A framework that helped authorities understand how one individual had reached a point where mass violence became conceivable. Yet even at the conclusion of the investigation, important mysteries remained. Why Dawson College specifically? Why that particular day? Why those victims? Certain answers died with the perpetrator. No amount of forensic analysis could fully reconstruct every thought that passed through his mind. The limits of investigation became apparent. Authorities could explain much. They could not explain everything. Perhaps that is one of the most unsettling lessons from cases like Dawson College. Human behavior remains partially unknowable. Even the most thorough investigation cannot reveal every motivation, every emotion, every internal conflict. There will always be unanswered questions. The goal is not perfect understanding. The goal is understanding enough to learn, enough to recognize patterns, enough to improve prevention, enough to honor the truth. As the investigation entered its later stages, public attention gradually shifted. The immediate crisis had passed. The facts were becoming clearer. Communities began searching for meaning. Families sought closure. Survivors attempted to rebuild their lives. Meanwhile, authorities prepared official findings regarding the attack and its aftermath. The portrait that emerged was deeply troubling. A young man consumed by darkness. An identity shaped increasingly by violence and alienation. A trajectory that, in hindsight, seemed filled with warning signs. The breakthrough had revealed the path. Now society faced a different challenge. Determining what should happen next. Because although the perpetrator would never stand trial, the consequences of his actions would continue unfolding. Families still grieved. Survivors still suffered. Communities still demanded accountability. And Canada still needed to confront the broader questions raised by the tragedy. The investigation had uncovered the closest thing to an explanation. The next chapter would focus on justice. Not the traditional courtroom justice associated with a living defendant. Something more complicated. A search for accountability, remembrance, and answers in a case where the person responsible could never be placed on trial. Yet even without a defendant sitting before a judge, the pursuit of justice was far from over. Justice is usually imagined as a courtroom. A judge seated above the room. Attorneys presenting evidence. Witnesses taking the stand. Jurors listening carefully. A verdict delivered after weeks or months of testimony. For most criminal cases, that image feels familiar. There is a defendant. There is a trial. There is a sentence. There is, at least in theory, a final chapter. The Dawson College shooting offered none of those things. Kimveer Singh Gill died on the day of the attack. The person responsible for the violence never faced a criminal prosecution. He never sat before a judge. He never listened to witness testimony. He never heard survivors describe the fear they experienced. He never heard Anastasia Rebecca de Souza's family explain what had been taken from them. For many people affected by the tragedy, this reality created a unique and painful challenge. The legal process that often helps communities process violence could not occur. There would be no dramatic courtroom confrontation. No guilty verdict. No formal sentencing hearing. No opportunity to look the perpetrator in the eye and demand answers. The investigation had established what happened. The evidence was overwhelming. The attacker had been identified. The sequence of events had been reconstructed. The motive had been explored as thoroughly as possible. Yet justice remained an emotionally complicated concept. How do you achieve justice when the offender is already dead? How do families find closure when the person responsible can never be punished? How does a community move forward when many of its questions can never be answered? In the weeks following the shooting, these questions spread throughout Montreal. The city was grieving. Students were grieving. Families were grieving. And grief rarely follows a straight path. Some people sought understanding. Others sought accountability. Many simply struggled to comprehend the scale of the loss. At Dawson College, the emotional wounds remained visible long after the crime scene investigation ended. The police tape eventually disappeared. Classes would eventually resume. Hallways would eventually fill with students again. But returning to normal proved far more difficult than reopening a building. For survivors, every familiar location carried new meaning. A staircase became the place where someone hid. A classroom became the place where someone waited in fear. A hallway became the place where panic erupted. Trauma has a way of attaching itself to geography. Places remember, even when the physical evidence is gone. The college administration faced an enormous challenge. Education had to continue. Students still needed support. Faculty still needed guidance. A community shaken by violence needed a path forward. Counseling services became critically important. Mental health professionals worked with students attempting to process what they had witnessed. Some survivors struggled with anxiety. Others experienced recurring memories. Many found themselves startled by sudden noises. Some avoided crowded public spaces. Others developed difficulties concentrating in class. The effects varied from person to person. But one reality became increasingly clear. The shooting had ended. The trauma had not. Medical professionals would later observe that a significant percentage of students present during the attack experienced symptoms associated with psychological distress. This was not surprising. Human beings are not designed to witness extreme violence without consequences. The mind often continues replaying traumatic events long after the danger has passed. Certain sounds, certain images, certain moments. They return unexpectedly. Months later. Years later. Sometimes decades later. For many survivors, recovery became a journey rather than a destination. Meanwhile, outside the college, broader discussions were beginning. Government officials, law enforcement agencies, educational institutions, mental health experts, all were asking versions of the same question. What lessons should be learned from Dawson College? Mass violence often triggers public debate. The debate usually focuses on prevention. How can future tragedies be avoided? What warning signs should receive greater attention? What systems should be improved? The Dawson shooting intensified conversations already taking place throughout Canada. Conversations about school security. Conversations about firearms. Conversations about mental health intervention. Conversations about threat assessment. The tragedy did not create these discussions, but it gave them renewed urgency. Across the country, educators reviewed emergency procedures. Law enforcement agencies examined response protocols. Experts analyzed the timeline of events. Every institution sought insight. Every institution hoped to identify improvements. This process represented another form of justice. Not punishment. Prevention. The idea that future lives might be protected because lessons had been learned. Yet for families directly affected by the shooting, policy discussions often felt distant. Abstract. Important, but distant. Their losses were personal. Immediate. Permanent. No procedural reform could restore the life that had been taken. No security improvement could erase grief. No public debate could undo September 13, 2006. For Anastasia Rebecca de Souza's family, justice existed within a different emotional landscape. Their daughter was gone. The future they imagined for her had disappeared. Birthdays would arrive without her. Family gatherings would feel incomplete. Photographs would become more precious. Memories would become more painful. One of the most heartbreaking realities of sudden violence is the way it transforms ordinary objects. A photograph becomes a treasure. A voicemail becomes irreplaceable. A handwritten note becomes priceless. Things that once seemed ordinary acquire extraordinary meaning. Families preserve these fragments because they represent continuity. Proof that a loved one existed. Proof that a life was larger than the tragedy that ended it. As the months passed, memorial events helped the community express collective grief. Students gathered. Faculty gathered. Families gathered. Moments of silence were observed. Tributes were delivered. Flowers appeared. Candles appeared. Messages appeared. These rituals serve an important purpose. They allow communities to reclaim humanity from violence. Mass shootings often generate headlines focused on perpetrators, names, weapons, timelines, investigations. Memorials reverse that process. They shift attention back to victims, back to lives, back to relationships, back to the people who matter most. In the aftermath of Dawson College, many individuals worked deliberately to ensure that Anastasia would be remembered as a person rather than simply a victim. A student, a daughter, a friend, a young woman with dreams. Someone whose life extended far beyond a single tragic afternoon. This effort represented another form of justice. The refusal to allow violence to define someone's entire story. The refusal to reduce a human life to a statistic. As official investigations concluded, authorities released findings that clarified many aspects of the attack. The shooter had acted alone. The attack had been planned. The evidence pointed toward a history of isolation, violent fascination, and psychological distress. Yet important uncertainties remained. The exact motive could never be established with complete certainty. Some questions would remain unanswered forever. This frustrated many people. Human beings crave conclusions. We want stories to end neatly. We want every mystery solved. Every motive explained. Every question answered. Real life rarely cooperates. Sometimes investigations end with ambiguity. Sometimes certainty remains out of reach. The Dawson College case became one of those situations. Authorities learned much. They did not learn everything. And perhaps that reality carries an important lesson. Justice is not always the same as understanding. Sometimes understanding remains incomplete. Yet justice can still exist. Justice can exist in remembrance. Justice can exist in support for survivors. Justice can exist in institutional change. Justice can exist in efforts to prevent future violence. Justice can exist in refusing to forget. Years later, when people reflected upon the Dawson College shooting, many remembered the courage displayed during the crisis. Students helping one another. First responders rushing toward danger. Medical personnel treating the wounded. Families supporting one another through unimaginable grief. These stories often receive less attention than the violence itself. Yet they reveal something essential. Tragedy exposes darkness. It also exposes resilience. The two frequently emerge together. The attack sought to create fear. The response revealed compassion. The attack sought to destroy. The response focused on healing. The attack lasted minutes. The recovery would last years. And throughout that recovery, a community continued searching for ways to honor those affected. No courtroom verdict was ever delivered. No sentencing hearing ever occurred. No judge formally declared guilt. The facts made such proceedings unnecessary. Yet history delivered its own verdict. The attack became remembered as an act of senseless violence. The victims became remembered as individuals whose lives mattered. The survivors became remembered for their resilience. And the community became remembered for its determination to move forward despite profound loss. This was not the justice anyone would have chosen. The ideal outcome would have been no attack at all. Anastasia would still be alive. Students would have completed an ordinary day of classes. Families would have returned home together. The tragedy would never have happened. But history does not offer alternative endings. It offers only reality. And the reality of Dawson College left a permanent mark on Montreal, on Canada, and on everyone whose life intersected with September 13, 2006. The legal chapter was over. The investigation was complete. The findings had been delivered. Yet the most enduring consequences of the tragedy were still unfolding. Because after the cameras leave and the headlines fade, another story begins. The story of memory. The story of healing. The story of how individuals and communities carry grief through the years that follow. That story would become the final chapter of Dawson College. And it would prove just as important as everything that came before. Long after the sirens stopped echoing through downtown Montreal, and long after the hallways of Dawson College were reopened to students, something quieter remained behind. Memory. Not the kind that fades neatly with time. The kind that reshapes itself, embedding into places, people, and routines. For those who lived through September 13, 2006, the day never fully returned to the category of the past. It became a reference point. A before and after dividing line that followed them into adulthood. In the years that followed, Dawson College slowly resumed its role as a place of learning. Classes continued. New students arrived who had no personal memory of the shooting. Hallways once again filled with conversation, footsteps, and the ordinary rhythm of academic life. On the surface, everything looked repaired. But beneath that surface, the legacy of what happened remained present in subtle ways. Some students walked through the building without ever knowing the exact location of the attack, yet still feeling an unspoken heaviness in certain areas. Others who were present that day found themselves returning to campus with a changed awareness of vulnerability. Safety, once assumed, had become something consciously acknowledged. Not absent, but no longer invisible. For survivors, healing was not a straight path. It rarely is after traumatic violence. Some found support through counseling and community. Others leaned on friends and family. Some avoided reminders of the event altogether. Others felt compelled to understand it, reading accounts, watching news coverage, trying to reconstruct meaning from chaos. There were days when life felt normal again. And there were days when memory returned without warning. A sound. A crowd. A sudden noise in a public space. Small triggers that pulled the mind back to an afternoon that could not be fully left behind. For families of the victims, grief took on a different shape. Not only absence, but absence that continued to be felt in every future moment. Birthdays that would never arrive. Milestones that would never be reached. Conversations that would never happen. Over time, grief did not disappear. It changed form. It became quieter. More integrated into daily life. But it remained. The memorial created at Dawson College became one of the places where that memory found expression. A garden space dedicated to reflection and remembrance. Not designed for spectacle. Designed for stillness. A place where students could pause without needing words. Where silence itself carried meaning. Where the absence of those lost could be acknowledged without explanation. Names like Anastasia Rebecca D'Souza were not only recorded in official reports or news archives. They were spoken in ceremonies. Remembered in gatherings. Carried by people who refused to let them fade into statistics. Because numbers can describe scale. But they cannot describe lives. And they cannot describe love. Over time, the Dawson College shooting also became part of a broader national reflection in Canada. It joined a list of tragedies that shaped conversations about school safety, mental health awareness, emergency response, and the nature of violence in public spaces. Policy discussions continued. Training procedures evolved. Institutions reviewed how they respond to crises. But even as systems changed, the deeper question remained unresolved. How do you prevent something that begins inside a single human mind? There is no simple answer to that question. The investigation had shown that warning signs can exist without clarity. That distress can be visible without being understood. That fascination with violence can remain hidden within broader patterns of behavior that do not always appear immediately dangerous. This complexity is one of the hardest realities for societies to confront. Because it removes the comfort of certainty. It replaces simple explanations with layered ones. And it forces acceptance of limits. Limits in prediction. Limits in prevention. Limits in understanding. Yet alongside those limits, another truth emerged from Dawson College. Violence does not have the final word. Not entirely. The shooting was real. Its consequences were lasting. But it did not erase the humanity of those who were there. It did not erase the courage shown in moments of terror. It did not erase the support that followed in the aftermath. It did not erase the community that rebuilt itself slowly, carefully, and deliberately. Years later, when people speak about Dawson College, they often remember different things. Some remember fear. Some remember confusion. Some remember the moment they realized something irreversible was happening. But many also remember something else. The instinct to help. The instinct to protect others. The instinct to survive together rather than alone. In those moments, humanity did not disappear. It became more visible. The tragedy also left behind a quieter legacy within conversations about mental health and isolation. The case forced difficult questions about how individuals in distress are identified and supported before crises occur. It highlighted the importance of recognizing warning signs without oversimplifying them. And it emphasized that intervention is not only a matter of enforcement, but also of connection. Connection that can sometimes make a difference long before violence becomes a possibility. Still, even with reflection, Dawson College remains a case defined by unanswered questions. Why that day? Why that place? Why those victims? Some of those answers were never fully recoverable. And perhaps they were never meant to be. Because understanding every detail of why a tragedy happens does not undo its existence. What remains instead is the responsibility of memory. To remember what happened. To remember who was lost. To remember the impact on those who survived. And to carry those memories forward in a way that acknowledges both pain and resilience. On the surface, time moves on. New generations enter the same classrooms. New stories unfold within the same building. Life continues, as it always does. But beneath that continuity, September 13, 2006 remains anchored in place. A fixed point in history that cannot be rewritten. For those directly affected, it becomes part of personal identity. Something carried quietly. Something that never fully leaves. Yet over time, something else grows alongside it. The ability to continue. To study. To work. To form relationships. To experience joy again without forgetting what was lost. This coexistence is not simple. It is not clean. It does not follow a straight emotional path. But it is real. And it represents the way many survivors and families learn to live after mass violence. Not by returning to who they were before, but by becoming someone who carries both memory and life at the same time. At Dawson College, the physical space where tragedy once unfolded now exists within an everyday environment again. Students pass through it without always thinking about its history. Yet the history remains embedded there. Invisible, but present. Like a layer beneath ordinary life. And perhaps that is where the final meaning of this story rests. Not in the act of violence itself. Not in the identity of the perpetrator. But in the lives that continued afterward. In the refusal to let a single afternoon define everything that came before or everything that came after. The Dawson College shooting will always be remembered as a moment of profound loss. But it will also be remembered for something else. The way a community responded when confronted with something unimaginable. The way survivors endured what should never have happened. The way families carried grief forward with dignity. The way memory became not only about tragedy, but about humanity surviving within it. In the end, true crime stories often focus on the darkest moments of human behavior. But their lasting impact is not only defined by those moments. It is also defined by what comes after. And in the aftermath of Dawson College, what came after was not silence. It was remembrance. It was resilience. And it was the ongoing effort to ensure that those who were lost are never reduced to the violence that took them away. If there is one illusion that mass violence destroys more completely than any physical structure, it is the belief that ordinary days are guaranteed. Dawson College was not a place defined by danger. It was defined by routine, by learning, by the predictable rhythm of students moving through a shared space in pursuit of futures that still felt open. That is what makes what happened on September 13, 2006 so difficult to fully absorb even years later. It did not emerge from a battlefield or a place of known conflict. It emerged from within ordinary life itself. When people revisit that day, they often begin with the same instinctive question. Why did it happen? But over time, another question tends to surface, quieter but more difficult. What do we do with the knowledge that it can happen anywhere ordinary life exists? There is no comforting answer to that question. Only a set of realities that communities slowly learn to live with. Safety is not a permanent condition. It is a continuous effort. Awareness is not a guarantee. It is a practice. Even the most carefully maintained systems cannot fully eliminate unpredictability when human behavior itself contains uncertainty. Yet if Dawson College leaves behind only fear, it would be an incomplete understanding of what followed. Because what also followed was response, reflection, and a collective refusal to let the event define everything that came after it. In the immediate aftermath, the focus was survival and stabilization. In the longer aftermath, the focus shifted toward rebuilding something less visible but equally important. Trust. Trust in spaces of learning. Trust in community. Trust that meaning could still exist after something that appeared to erase it in a single afternoon. Survivors did not return to the same emotional landscape they left behind. That would not be possible. But many returned. They studied again. They spoke again. They built routines again. Not because the memory disappeared, but because life continued alongside it. In that coexistence lies one of the most difficult forms of resilience. Families of the victims carried a different kind of continuation. Not recovery, but remembrance. Not closure, but adaptation. The absence remained permanent, yet so did the commitment to preserve the identity of those lost beyond the moment of violence. Their names were not allowed to be confined to the day they died. They were carried forward in conversations, in memorials, in the quiet persistence of memory that refuses to flatten a life into a single event. For the broader public, Dawson College became part of a larger pattern of reflection about violence in educational spaces. It raised questions that do not resolve easily because they exist at the intersection of psychology, access, prevention, and human unpredictability. Warning signs, when they exist, do not always form a clear narrative. They are often fragmented, scattered across behavior that can be interpreted in multiple ways. This ambiguity is what makes prevention both essential and difficult. The case also highlighted something that cannot be measured in statistics or policy reports: the distance between perception and reality in human behavior. Someone can appear withdrawn without being dangerous. Someone can appear troubled without any trajectory toward violence. At the same time, distress can escalate in ways that are not immediately visible to others. These contradictions are not exceptions. They are part of the human condition itself. Understanding this does not make the tragedy easier to accept. It makes it more complex. But complexity is necessary if the goal is not only explanation, but prevention. In the years following the shooting, Dawson College slowly returned to its function as a place of education. New students arrived who carried no memory of the event. Others who did remember carried it differently depending on their proximity to it. Over time, the building became layered with both history and present life. One does not erase the other. They exist together. This coexistence is one of the most important truths that remains after violence. That places are not defined permanently by the worst thing that happened within them. They are also defined by everything that continues afterward. Every lecture, every conversation, every ordinary moment that returns life to the space again. There is a temptation in true crime storytelling to search for resolution in understanding the perpetrator. To believe that if the internal logic of the act is fully reconstructed, something about its meaning becomes complete. But cases like Dawson College resist that closure. The internal world of the attacker may be partially reconstructed, but never fully known in a way that satisfies the desire for total explanation. And perhaps it should not be. Some forms of violence do not offer coherent narratives. They offer consequences. What can be understood more clearly is what the event demanded from everyone else. It demanded response under uncertainty. It demanded resilience in the absence of control. It demanded that a community find a way to continue without forgetting. In that sense, the legacy of Dawson College is not only written in what was lost, but in what was preserved. The willingness of people to help one another during the attack. The efforts of first responders who entered chaos with purpose. The students who supported each other in fear. The families who endured waiting without answers. The survivors who continued forward while carrying memory with them. These are not secondary details. They are part of the full reality of what happened. Years later, the question that often remains is not whether the event can be fully understood, but what it teaches about the fragile structure of everyday life. It teaches that safety is something maintained collectively, not assumed individually. It teaches that warning signs, when they appear, must be treated with care and seriousness without reducing human complexity to simple labels. It teaches that communities are tested not only by prevention, but by response and recovery. And it leaves behind a final, quieter understanding. That life continues in the same spaces where tragedy once occurred, not because the past disappears, but because people choose, repeatedly, to keep building forward. Dawson College remains what it was meant to be before everything else. A place where young people learn, change, and imagine futures that extend beyond the present moment. The memory of September 13, 2006 remains part of its history, but it is not the entirety of it. In the end, that is what survival looks like on a collective scale. Not erasure. Not forgetting. But continuation in the presence of memory. And for those who carry the story of that day, in any form, that continuation is the only ending that time allows.